the Imperial Era from scratch. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 151, The Caravan from the Capital. Diogo was puzzled. Why did he see the sign but no sign of Wintertown? Could it be that the town had vanished? It wasn't until he finally saw Wintertown, bustling in the distance like a construction site, after walking a long way, that he realized he'd been mistaken. Why put up a sign so far away? I don't know. The two young men couldn't understand why. If they wanted to remind people that Wintertown was just around the corner, wouldn't a signpost right there be better? At least they'd be able to see the town right in sight and know exactly where the Wintertown on the sign was. Confused, the two young men continued along with the caravan, finally arriving at the Wintertown they longed for. This is Wintertown. Diogo looked around. To be honest, he was a little disappointed with this famous Wintertown. It looked not much different from his own village. Yet, we're finally here. Marty's expression remained unchanged, his expression as indifferent as ever, seemingly uninterested in anything. But his bright eyes betrayed his true intentions. You two, help move the things, a caravan manager nearby instructed two young men to get to work. Hey, come on, Diogo agreed, tugging Marty. Do the job well first. If you're lucky, you might even get a little reward. With a reward, combined with their own savings, they could hire someone to build a small house, and maybe even have a little left over for seeds or something. But they wondered if they'd have enough to rent farm tools for the land reclamation, and how they'd even earn enough for food. Wintertown didn't look like there were many profitable jobs. As he pondered this, Marty and he, as usual, unpacked a few items of each commodity to sample for the Wintertown residents. Unexpectedly, the caravan leader approached and instructed the two young men, unload all the goods from this wagon. All. They turned back uncertainly, and only after receiving a positive response did they begin unloading. After a brief moment of work, the two men finally unloaded the cargo from the wagons. While resting, they noticed a large group of people had arrived at the caravan. Through the words of some nearby, Diogo learned that the handsome young man leading the group was the legendary Baron of Glamorgan, the incredibly lucky Lord and Mayor of Wintertown. What kind of goods are these, Your Excellency, Baron of Glamorgan? These are medicinal herbs? Medicinal herbs? David looked at the merchant before him with a strange expression. The merchant's bright smile seemed quite festive, but he felt as if he were being tricked. Still, this solves my most pressing need. David glanced at Cordell beside him. After receiving the Lord's instructions, the pharmacist immediately stepped forward to examine the herb's variety and quality. Soon, Cordell returned to David's side and nodded to the Lord. These are all top-quality herbs, and the kind that aren't easy to find. I want them all. Thank you for your patronage, the merchant said with a broad smile. He gestured to his servants to move the herbs to the location designated by the Baron. Baron Glamorgan no longer needed to handle these matters. Having received a large amount of herbs, Cordell directed the servants to move them to the designated location. Those with less demanding storage requirements were placed in the warehouse. Those with more demanding storage conditions and requiring quick processing were transported directly to his cabin. Diogo and Marty, two young men, were among the laborers helping to transport medicinal herbs. After seeing the warehouse and the pharmacist's cabin, they whispered, perhaps we could find work with this pharmacist. Even if we don't get paid, just enough food. Marty agreed with Diogo's suggestion, and Diogo decided to find a better time later to contact the pharmacist. He feared that if they were slow, the job would be snatched up by someone else in Wintertown. Unbeknownst to the two young men, David was still chatting with the caravan leader, Waldo. Waldo's trip from the capital to Wintertown was largely due to advice from Earl Sutton Stewart. The merchant had originally planned to explore the northern plains, but Earl Sutton Stewart had sent someone to contact him just before he set out. Waldo, invited by a lord, couldn't afford to neglect his duties. He rushed over immediately, earning him a delivery mission for the lord. The destination was Wintertown, one of the most remote towns on the northern plains. While the destination was a bit remote, it was a simple task, so Waldo naturally had no reason to refuse. Furthermore, the Lord had given him a small instruction, asking him to prepare more goods, promising that they would all be sold once they reached Wintertown. In fact, even if Lord Stewart offered no benefits, Waldo would still be willing to do the Lord a small favor. He didn't even ask for anything in return. All he needed was for the Lord to remember him as a merchant and ask him to help him with future purchases. Furthermore, the Lord had one request: if anyone or any force attempted to obstruct or even dissuade his team from reaching Wintertown, Waldo should ignore them. If necessary, he could simply mention Lord Stuart's name and claim he was working for him. Of course, if someone truly refused to let Waldo's caravan through, there was no need to risk their lives. All they had to do was note their identity and report it to Lord Stuart. Hearing the potential danger, Waldo briefly considered giving up. But he quickly realized that the Earl, the brother of the current Queen of the Kingdom of Tiran, had specifically invited him to deliver the goods, and you had the nerve to refuse. Did he still want to stay in the Tiran Kingdom? So he patted his chest and promised to fulfill the Earl's request and deliver the goods safely and intact to Wintertown. As a result, Waldo's caravan became the only one to reach Wintertown. They encountered several caravans heading north, but their cargo had been sold out by the surrounding new towns and villages, leaving them no reason to continue on to Wintertown. After handing the Earl's entrusted cargo and letters to Baron Glamorgan, Waldo began promoting his own wares, the extra goods the Earl had requested, including the medicinal herbs. "Respected Baron Glamorgan, would you like to see any other merchandise?" David nodded. Clearly well prepared, he assumed the items he'd saved were what he needed. He readily offered, "What else do you have in your fleet? Show it to me." "Yes, sir." Seeing Baron Glamorgan's willingness, Waldo's smile widened, and he displayed the remaining ore, rolls of cloth and silk, and various processed leathers. There were also some more luxurious items, such as wine, spices, and even inferior versions of the cleansing and aromatherapy orbs that Earl Stuart had gifted David, with much fewer uses, typically no more than 10. "Very good, that's all I need," David said politely, accepting all the remaining items from the caravan. "Lord Glamorgan is truly an incredibly generous lord. I believe that under your wise leadership, Wintertown will surely become the most dazzling jewel in the northern Tiran kingdom." Having completed the Earl's instructions and cleared out all the merchandise, Waldo was in a very good mood. He flattered David profusely, regardless of whether others believed his words or not. David smiled and accepted all the compliments. He had already spent his own money, so it was only natural to enjoy the flattery. As for paying the bill, he wasn't worried about running out of money, because Earl Stuart had asked Waldo to deliver a shipment of coins and jewelry. From the accompanying letter, David knew that the money wasn't given to David for nothing, but rather that Earl Stuart had used the gifts David had left him to develop new markets. He had also made a considerable profit in the Tiran kingdom, so he gave David a share of the profits. Besides money and jewelry, he also brought some samples, hoping David would point out any flaws after examining them and, ideally, offer some new guidance and suggestions. He hadn't yet decided how to respond to Earl Stuart's request for advice. After confirming that the caravan would rest in Wintertown for 2 days and, barring any unforeseen circumstances, depart for the capital on the morning of the 3rd day, David expressed his hope that Waldo would help him deliver a letter to Earl Sutton Stuart. "Leave it to me," Waldo readily agreed. He certainly wouldn't miss the opportunity to see Lord Stuart again. "I'm sorry, but my territory isn't fully constructed yet, so I can't offer you a comfortable resting place." David gestured to a nearby construction site. "However, Wintertown has some excellent local specialties. I hope you'll enjoy them." With this, David handed the task of entertaining the merchants to the old hunter Addis. As a native of the Kingdom of Tiran, Addis knew best what would be suitable for entertaining guests without arousing suspicion. Chapter 152 Enchanted Equipment. Ore, cloth and silk rolls, leather, medicinal herbs, and some ready-made clothing. David's Wintertown had received a large supply. While David wasn't short of some of these items, it was always beneficial to have a larger resource reserve. More importantly, these supplies were acquired from this world through trade, rather than relying on lore and forging to help with transfusions from other worlds. David saw hope that Wintertown was gradually getting back on track, and his mood brightened. Even his impression of Lord Sutton Stuart improved. However, this is a bit of a headache. David, looking at the samples displayed nearby, was unsure how to make a suggestion. Laura and Eva were examining the samples, and Laura was speechless. She looked at the pairs of socks, battle robes, and high heels of various styles and materials before her, curious about what David had done in the capital. "Do you two have anything you like? These socks look okay." Laura picked up a few pairs of socks that appeared to be made of pure cotton. She was physically active and loved running around, so she preferred cotton. She didn't seem to particularly like knee-high socks. David had never seen her wear them. Huh? There's a label on them. Laura picked up a pair of cotton socks she liked and noticed a long, inscribed label. It says, "Woven with the kingdom's finest cotton yarn and premium magic silk." What kind of material is premium magic silk? It seems to be the silk spun by some spider-like magical beast, David replied uncertainly. I've only heard of it, never seen it, and I haven't paid much attention to it. He had heard of magic silk back in Iron Tree Castle, but had never actually come into contact with it. Later, when he was able to, he was busy with various other things and hadn't inquired about it. More importantly, he preferred modern clothing, so he didn't care much for the various materials of this world. What's so special about it? Laura tugged at the socks in her hand, noticing the pleasant feel and elasticity. Huh? Looks good. Initially unconcerned, Laura began to examine the other samples. Besides the various socks, there were also several pairs of shoes. Noticing the labels attached to these shoes, Laura picked one up and examined it. She wasn't drawn to the 10-centimeter stilettos, but rather to the information on the label. The shoes had two simple magical effects: spatial expansion and stabilization, making them more comfortable to wear and eliminating the worry of unstable footing. Laura noticed David still staring blankly at the blank piece of paper, so she raised the shoes in her hand to draw his attention. What's wrong? Seeing Laura holding up the black and red high heels with red soles and looking at her, she assumed she had taken a liking to them. You like these? They look nice. No, I was just saying, there's no special equipment in Wintertown anymore, right? Yes, David felt a pang of displeasure at the mere mention of this. In novels I'd read, the protagonists who traveled to other worlds seemed to receive space equipment for free, so why didn't I see any of it? It must be that he had recently acquired a Cybertronian body, and with Cybertronian compression technology, he'd barely solved the problem of carrying large amounts of ammunition. Otherwise, he'd be even more frustrated. Why are you asking this all of a sudden? I just wanted to remind you that Wintertown now has space equipment. Laura raised her shoes again, removed the label, and handed them to David. David, puzzled, took the small card, read the contents, and was speechless. Oh my goodness, so all these products created by Earl Sutton Stewart are enchanted equipment? A pair of high heels actually has two magical effects. Could this be the proverbial "the bigger your shoes, the bigger my feet"? He watched as Laura curiously sat on the edge of the bed, put on the high heels in her hand, and then stood up and took a few steps. How do they feel? It feels just like wearing ordinary flat shoes, Laura answered Eva, surprised by the magical heels on her feet. There's no squeezing at all, and I feel very stable. Listening to Laura's answer, David suddenly understood how those female warriors he'd seen in his past life, who'd walked on flat ground and scaled walls in high heels, had managed such outrageous feats. They were actually wearing magical equipment manufactured by Earl Sutton Stewart, right? So the Decepticons and the Tyrannosaurus Rex weren't defeated by the protagonist's halo, but by mysterious magic. Perhaps this explanation would make the Decepticons and the Tyrannosaurus feel a little more comfortable. Laura's unexpected discovery piqued the two women's interest in the items, and they began to examine each label, wondering what strange effects they possessed. David, inspired by Laura's discovery, began writing back to Earl Sutton Stewart, offering his own suggestion: don't just focus on everyday wear. Similar innovations could be made for female knights' armor. By the time a letter was finished, the two women had finished looking through the samples. They each selected one or two pieces, saying the rest would be given to other people in the town. Would you like to choose one? Laura glanced at David one last time and picked up a purple tabard. I think this one suits you perfectly. Let's keep this for Lancelot. Huh? Laura, with a look of is there some legend I don't know, casually tossed the tabard back and prepared to leave with Eva. I'm going back to the forest with Sylvanus tomorrow, so I won't be with you tonight. Last time, after 2 days and 1 night of wandering the forest with Sylvanus, they still couldn't find the Great Wolf of the North. This time, the two planned to explore further and adjust their direction slightly. Actually, you could go to Quel'Thalas or Lordaeron and capture a pet that suits your taste. I just want to catch the Great Wolf of the North. I refuse to believe I'll never catch one. Hearing Laura say this, David understood. Laura was upset because she hadn't achieved her original goal. Since that was the case, David stopped trying to persuade her and let her do whatever she wanted. It was much safer than a sudden excursion to Azeroth for archaeological research. he continued writing letters. After completing his reply to Lord Sutton Stewart, David resumed his usual light training. Although his journey to Azeroth had greatly improved his physical fitness and light, and he had even activated the powerful transformation ability of Cybertron's body, he didn't feel that this was enough and continued his daily training. Not only did he not stop practicing light, but he also continued his training in archery, firearms, lances, and bare-handed combat. Even though he was currently studying alchemy, he had no intention of reducing his training schedule. Wintertown wasn't busy these days, leaving him with plenty of free time. He didn't find it tiring to schedule tons of training every day. His energy was incredibly high, and not doing anything to release that excess energy would only make him feel worse. Tisk, come to think of it, is Laura scared? It had been Laura who had been the first to start the fight, often employing bizarre moves, only to be defeated first. This incompetent yet playful behavior left David speechless. Lights out, bed. A peaceful night. David woke early the next morning and worked his usual hours. When he emerged from the blacksmith shop, he inquired about the caravan leader, Waldo. That merchant named Waldo is wandering around town, probably looking for specialties to sell in the capital. Elias had seen Waldo several times, each time in a different location. His probing demeanor perfectly matched his impression of a merchant. Just as David was about to summon Waldo to question him, he suddenly changed his mind and took Elias directly to Pierre Newton. Alchemist Newton still lived with Jonah. He and Jonah got along well, and the accommodations in the dining hall were more spacious and comfortable than a typical cabin, so he hadn't chosen to build a separate cabin. Furthermore, Newton had initially been staying temporarily but later decided to stay permanently. He was aware of Wintertown's future development plans, so building a temporary cabin was unnecessary. Not surprisingly, David also saw Gina there. What was even more surprising was that he also saw Sylvanus, Lyadrin, Peggy, Laura, Sharon, Elizabeth, Eva, and a whole host of other women. What's going on? Newton shook his head, spreading his hands to indicate he had no idea. The women suddenly came over, as if they had planned it out. It was Eva who leaned over and whispered something to David. It turned out that after Laura and Eva took the samples yesterday, they gathered several women in town this morning to divide up the special equipment. If it were just simple shoes and socks, people might not have paid much attention, but when they learned that these equipment had some enchanted effects, the women became interested. Initially, everyone asked Gina, wondering if this Kirin-Tor mage from Dalaran could do something similar. After learning that Gina was not proficient in this kind of magic, they found the old alchemist Pierre Newton. After figuring out the women's purpose, Newton could only emphasize again, I am an alchemist. For things like adding magical effects to items, you should go to a mage. I have one right here. I'm not proficient in this kind of magic either. Also, I want to ask, are the spells on them achieved with special materials? Or can they be made with any material? Chapter 153 This turtle is not for sale. Gina tried to use this seemingly insignificant incident to gauge the level of magic in this world. If there were material requirements, it wouldn't be much different from what she knew. If there were no material restrictions, it might mean that this world's magic was even more advanced than Azeroth's. Of course, a final conclusion couldn't be made so easily, but it could serve as a basis for judgment. Newton glanced at Gina, finally accepting the strange shoes she held in her hand. A brief inspection yielded his answer. These shoes aren't made of ordinary materials, and the magic they possess is very weak, even inferior to the magic of the cleansing orb. Hearing the old alchemist's words, Gina took the silver high heels back, feeling a slight sense of relief. It seemed that the magic level in this world wasn't so strong that anything could be enchanted. David, standing nearby, also got the answer he was looking for after hearing Newton's words. So, the magic attached to these is insignificant. Yes, then, if I want to imbue them with stronger magic, I'll have to use equipment made of special materials. Newton glanced at David and immediately saw through the Baron's intentions. Are you planning to create some kind of magical item? Of course, special materials are needed for that kind of thing. Ordinary materials can't withstand the power of magic. David listened to the alchemist's explanation and found it reasonable. However, he wanted to know how much additional space these shoes provided. How much? Pierre Newton returned his gaze to the pair of shoes that had just been taken away from him. Not very much. Actually, very little. I couldn't even fit a large metal ingot in there. This level of space expansion is completely impractical. Oh, now it's somewhat practical. The Count is quite a thoughtful person. So, if I want to create a storage item at least 1 cubic meter in size, what is the minimum material required? After some questioning, David finally got to the point. As Baron Glamorgan's personal information consultant, the alchemist had to give an accurate answer. He pondered over it, carefully considering it for a while before offering what he considered the most accurate answer. 1 cubic meter isn't a huge amount, but considering that storage items are used to carry various items, they require a high level of stability. Therefore, I personally recommend choosing the hide of a glutton as the primary material. Knowing David's lack of understanding, the old alchemist briefly explained what a glutton was: a python-like magical beast with a strong sense of territory, high aggression, and certain special properties. The hide of a glutton is considered the most common special magical material. Where can I get the skin of this monster? It doesn't exist within the Tiran kingdom. There are very few glutton skins for sale in the Tiran capital. The ones I do see are just scraps, and they won't meet your requirements. Newton gestured at the shoes. Using those scraps to craft storage equipment would only be slightly better than these shoes. That's definitely not what you want, but Pierre Newton's tone suddenly shifted, rising several notches, drawing everyone's attention. While traveling across the continent, I found several ores with special properties. These ores can also be used to craft special equipment. David's eyelids twitched as a sudden realization dawned on him. Pierre Newton's lips curled up. Seeing everyone eagerly watching him, anticipating his answer, he felt incredibly satisfied. All his previous suspense had paid off. And I'm an alchemist who particularly enjoys studying ores, so, David stared intently at old Newton. If his answer didn't match his expectations, the old alchemist would be in for some headaches for the time being. Have you thoroughly analyzed and mastered the structure of that ore? By analysis and mastery, David meant that the alchemist knew how to use alchemy to transform other ores into this ore. Of course, perhaps noticing the threat and warning in David and the others' gazes, Pierre Newton didn't keep them waiting. He answered David's question succinctly. Moreover, I know how to properly use the metal extracted from this ore to create the storage equipment you desire. Really, in fact, I use this storage equipment myself. Otherwise, how could I travel the continent with a pile of ores? David was surprised at the old alchemist's words, then speechless. He pondered over and over, but he hadn't even considered Pierre Newton. How could he have asked the old alchemist if he had any storage items? But upon closer inspection, even if he had asked before, the alchemist wouldn't have been so forthright as he was now, offering to refine special property ores and help David and the others craft special storage equipment. The old alchemist had originally been a temporary employee, never envisioning a permanent residency in Wintertown. Only recently, having decided to reside permanently, did the alchemist readily share his resources. By the way, if the storage device is made of metal, would it be something like a ring? Yes, that's perfect, I'll take that. A storage ring, the most convenient storage item, second only to portable storage device. But I must warn you, the ring is time-consuming and difficult to craft, so you might have to wait a while. Pierre Newton offered no objection, simply reminding David that the equipment would take some time to create. It's okay, I won't need it for now. At this point, he suddenly realized that perhaps he could make a batch first, which wouldn't take long, to make the storage items popular. This would also make it easier for everyone to travel and carry various items. What kind of items can be made quickly? Bracelets, wristbands, things that are bulky. How long does it take to make one? With enough ore and energy, one can be made quickly, Newton emphasized. But I don't have any extra ore of that kind, therefore, he would first use alchemy to create enough ore before he could begin crafting the storage items. During this time, he would need to rest and recover lost energy, so the process would gradually slow down. How many do you want me to make? 100 to start. Although Pierre Newton didn't yell and drive David and the others away, his expression perfectly expressed his feelings. I don't want to see you go away. However, before David left, Newton made it clear, come and pick up the storage item in a few days. I will make them into wristbands. If you don't like them, you can use alchemy to modify the appearance yourself. This kind of practice will also be of great benefit to your study of alchemy. I see. Waving to the old alchemist, David was the last one to leave Newton's residence. Then he saw that the group of women did not disperse, but instead walked towards the wooden house where Laura lived. He didn't know what they were going to talk about. Looking around, he happened to see Waldo, the leader of the caravan. When Waldo saw David, he immediately came up to say hello. Good afternoon, Baron Glamorgan. "Good afternoon." David saw that Waldo seemed to want to ask something, so he told him to just say whatever he wanted to say. "Your Excellency, Baron, as you know, I'm a merchant. This time, I'm bringing various goods from the capital of Tiran to Wintertown for sale." Facing a true baron, even a provincial one, Waldo didn't dare keep him in suspense and quickly stated his intentions. "I'll also purchase local specialties and bring them to the capital for sale. Which of Wintertown's specialties do you fancy?" Wintertown must have a lot of quirky things, and he was curious what Waldo had in mind. "Sir, those magical beasts called Squirtle and Eevee. I think they'd be very popular in the capital." Waldo hadn't expected to find anything special in a remote town like Wintertown. He was simply searching for the right goods out of habit, and if he couldn't find any, he'd just take a break. Unexpectedly, after a while, he discovered that Wintertown had quite a few peculiarities, especially the magical beasts called Squirtle, which could be seen everywhere in the town, and the Eevee, which roamed near the edge of the forest. These two magical beasts were docile and cute, and would definitely be popular with the nobles. If he could buy a few, he'd surely make a killing. He'd already inquired about it. Lord Glamorgan had issued a clear order prohibiting the capture of Squirtle and Eevee, so he didn't dare pursue any of them without permission. Besides the money, he could also establish connections with the royal capital's nobles, a connection even more alluring than pure cash. "Respected Lord Baron, what do you think? Rest assured, I'll offer a very reasonable price for each Pokemon." Waldo felt as if vast sums of money and countless connections were beckoning him. With just a nod from Lord Glamorgan, he could secure them all. However, his dreams were quickly shattered. "Wintertown will not sell Squirtle and Eevee," David emphasized, stressing that Squirtle and Eevee were protected creatures in Wintertown. Anyone attempting to secretly hunt these Pokemon would do so at their own peril. Chapter 154 Winter Nights. Without a warning, the other party might use the excuse, "I didn't know hunting wasn't allowed," so David emphasized his point and offered a bit of admonition. If they still tried to hunt Pokemon after being warned, don't blame him for taking drastic action. Waldo's dream shattered. He wanted to try again, but before he could open his mouth, he realized the Baron in front of him probably wouldn't discuss the matter with him. He believed the most important thing for a moderately successful businessman was the ability to discern the situation and avoid overstepping boundaries. So, Waldo decisively changed the subject, moving away from Squirtle and Eevee. Instead, he asked what goods Baron Glamorgan's Wintertown needed. He could prepare some specifically for Wintertown on his next visit. He didn't think his caravan could make any more money from Wintertown. This time, he had brought in a lot of supplies, and given Wintertown's size, that would last for a long time. Waldo even considered stopping north for a while and perhaps heading south. He was musing this inwardly when Baron Glamorgan, standing beside him, suddenly pointed it out. "It will be a long time before your caravan comes north again, right?" Waldo smiled warmly in response, offering to make a special trip for Baron Glamorgan if he needed it. "That's not necessary. I don't have anything I need urgently." David thought for a moment, believing this caravan could be put to good use. "If you're planning to travel to other parts of the Kingdom of Tiran, you could help me acquire some materials." "What materials does Baron seek?" "Special materials like the hides of gluttons." David suspected Waldo himself might also be reselling these materials. "Not just gluttons, but any special materials like these. Leave a portion for Wintertown. I'll buy them all the next time I come to the northern plains." Having space or didn't mean they were no longer needed. It was always a good idea to have a stockpile of these special materials on hand, whether urgent or not. One never knew when they might suddenly need them. "I understand, sir." Waldo truly understood. The Lord of Wintertown had actually begun purchasing various specialized materials. He just didn't know how much of a share he should leave him. After a moment's reflection, Waldo realized that the Baron of Glamorgan wanted a variety of materials, but hadn't specified any specific ones. He was probably simply stockpiling them, not having any specific needs at the moment. In that case, he could simply keep a portion of each. When the Baron had a specific need, he would naturally come to him for that particular material. With this in mind, Waldo realized he could establish a long-term trade relationship with the Lord of Wintertown. Since no other caravans had ever visited Wintertown, Waldo might be able to monopolize this trade route. While it wouldn't lead to instant wealth, it would offer long-term stability. Furthermore, judging by the Baron of Glamorgan's frequent correspondence with Earl Stewart, he had a good relationship with him. He could easily obtain the noble connections he desired from Earl Stuart. His shattered dream seemed to be reunited. Waldo happily said his last goodbye and began planning to head south after returning to the capital. Lord Glamorgan had mentioned various special materials, but he specifically mentioned the skin of the glutton. This beast was rarely seen in the Kingdom of Tiran, making it difficult to buy. If he wanted to purchase in bulk, it would be best to head to the southern border towns or even the New Allen Federation. Perfect, let's see what new goods are there. Considering the long journey ahead, perhaps he should expand the caravan? He thought of the two young men who had come with the caravan to Winter Town. They were young, strong, hard-working, and, crucially, inexpensive. They would be great if they could stay as long-term helpers. He approached the young men, Diogo and Marty, and offered them long-term employment, but they declined. What a shame, knowing they were aiming to cultivate land in Winter Town and become landowners. Waldo knew he wouldn't be able to convince them to join the caravan. However, he didn't force it. Seeing the two young men's hard work and the considerable profits they had made, Waldo, pleased, gave them an extra reward and wished them the best of luck in cultivating their own land. I hope that by the time I return to Winter Town, you two will have become small landowners with extensive farmland. The two young men, delighted by the reward, expressed their gratitude to the caravan leader and began looking forward to their next life in Winter Town. As per tradition, the reward meant the two men's departure from the caravan. They would rest for the night, and the caravan would depart from Winter Town tomorrow morning. This meant they would need to find new accommodations for the night. Fortunately, Diogo had previously contacted the pharmacist, Cordell, who had told them that Winter Town would provide basic food and lodging to farmers who came to settle there. They would also provide farming tools and seeds, ensuring that those who settled in Winter Town could quickly secure their own land. When the two young men first heard this, they thought the pharmacist was joking. Later, after asking others, especially those who had just arrived in Winter Town, they realized it was all true. The two young men happily began their new lives in Winter Town, and David's Winter Town had two more self-employed farmers. Meanwhile, David had received some information from Eva. Other towns are deliberately intercepting civilians heading to Winter Town. Yes, Eva observed as she helped the two young men register their information. Even the caravans can't get through. If Waldo hadn't received the goods entrusted to him by Earl Stuart, he wouldn't have made it to our shores. David looked at the information Eva had compiled, which clearly listed the towns and villages that had been intercepted. In addition to Marty and Diogo, the two newcomers who had just completed registration, Eva had also specifically sought out the 4 people who had previously arrived in Winter Town. The information from these individuals, organized and categorized, formed the intelligence David saw before him. As expected of an allied intelligence officer, David complimented, silently sighing that this was Eva's forte. Sitting in his cabin, David, examining the intelligence in his hands, noticed a pair of black, red-soled high heels twitching playfully beneath the small table, a hint of Eva's joy at the compliment. David alternated between reading the intelligence and looking under the table as he and Eva discussed the situation in the surrounding villages. Should we send Floyd or Gareth with some soldiers to warn the surrounding villages? No, we can intercept them if they want to. We can't stop those who truly want to come. Hadn't Marty and Diogo insisted on making it all the way to Winter Town? Hearing Eva mention the 2 knights, David remembered his earlier promise to them to recruit new soldiers. He wondered how things were going. Have they selected enough recruits? Still picking? Oh, he glanced down again. Huh? Was it an illusion? Was Eva's leg a little too far? He gently extended his leg and touched it, intending to remind Eva across from him, I know your legs are long, no need to show them off. However, she made no move to retract them, and David suddenly felt the magical power of this unique material, the finest magic silk, and his leg was unexpectedly sucked in. There was a second of silence. David, distracted by his wrestling match with Eva, continued discussing business. By the way, has Tyrion been back lately? No, remind me, next time Tyrion comes back, ask him to send a batch of iron-forged dwarven Garen rifles and ammunition. It would be best if you could tell me what metals the dwarves used to forge the rifles, as well as the specific formula for the bullets and gunpowder. Are these rifles for the new recruits, not just the new recruits? Tell Will to stop making the powerful small-caliber rifle ammunition. It just so happened that the original supply of powerful rifle ammunition was all used up in Azeroth. From now on, The rifles will mainly be made with Ironforge-produced Garand rifles. Importing weapons from Ironforge would be more convenient than asking Laura to buy and transport them. Furthermore, the Garand rifles made in Ironforge were far more powerful than those made on Earth. Combined with the powerful ammunition produced by Wintertown, it's essentially like having a semi-automatic rapid-fire cannon in every hand. With such ferocious firepower, it should be enough to sweep across the northern plains, right? Excited by the thought, David's legs moved unconsciously, provoking a counterattack from his opponent. The battle gradually shifted from simple wrestling to a show of skill. However, both sides were wary of using their full strength. They even opted for a more refined style of combat, back and forth, with slow, gentle movements that would ensure no harm. As for the firearms instructor, Jack Krauser can be the instructor. Krauser had been in Wintertown for some time, and after the initial adjustment, it was time to assign him a more serious role. Wintertown had just begun recruiting and training new soldiers, and as a former Special Forces member, Krauser naturally understood many training methods. However, he wasn't planning on letting Krauser take over the training of the soldiers directly, as Earth's training methods might not be suitable for this world. He would first assist Floyd and teach the soldiers about firearms. So, are you going to give Jack Krauser a formal position, firearms instructor for the Winter Knights? The advantage of being a lord is that you can even name your troops as you please. Okay. Meanwhile, Elias, standing to the side of David, was trying hard to maintain an expression of "I didn't see anything." Chapter 155 Days of Stable Development. After discussing business, it was decided that the Winter Knights would form the official military organization of Wintertown, and the basic weaponry for each soldier was also determined. David envisioned that the soldiers of the Winter Knights would be proficient in a variety of weaponry, including firearms and cold weapons. Each soldier would be equipped with a Garand rifle manufactured in Ironforge, using the powerful ammunition produced in Wintertown. Achieving this goal would take considerable time, primarily due to the current low production of crystal ore. However, as David's power continued to grow and his Goldfinger abilities improved, this issue would eventually become less of a problem. David hadn't yet determined how much ammunition each soldier could carry. If things went smoothly, perhaps he could issue each soldier a simple storage device. This would allow each soldier to carry a wider variety of items, and ammunition would naturally become less of a problem. Furthermore, each soldier would need a set of armor. Regardless of the style, David envisioned them wearing Wintertown's most powerful crystal armor. Adding standard cold weapons like cross swords, broadswords, and warhammers would complete the basic weaponry and armor. If possible, issue some flashbangs, incendiary grenades, and other supplementary equipment. Of course, this is standard equipment. If things go well, each squad can also be assigned positions like snipers and firepower personnel. At that time, specialized firearms will also need to be manufactured. And the pistols. The batch of M1911s Laura bought, like the HK416S, are feeling a bit weak, and David has begun considering crafting a new pistol. He hasn't yet decided whether to continue collaborating with the dwarves in Ironforge or wait until Wintertown's infrastructure is complete and then build a small arsenal in his own territory. More importantly, he hasn't decided which model will be the standard pistol for the Winter Order. Let's just leave it at that. The Winter Order is only in name now, far from being fully realized. David hasn't designated the pistol as standard equipment either. That can wait. After stamping the required documents, David told Eva to go back and rest. Watching Eva happily leave, David suddenly felt that today's experience had been quite exciting, even though they hadn't done anything. Then, glancing at Elias, who had said goodnight, David nodded to the ceremonial officer, suspecting he might have been influenced by Earl Sutton Stewart. A black eye attracts a black eye. Our ancestors were right. Throwing the blame away, David contentedly began his daily training before bedtime. Thus ended an ordinary day in Wintertown. With the caravan's departure, a period of peace descended upon Wintertown. David's daily routine was much the same. He'd wake up early, eat a quick meal, then tour Wintertown, practice forging iron and alchemy at the blacksmith's shop. After lunch, he'd study etiquette with Elias. Afterward, he'd practice archery, firearms, and other weapons, and then deal with some errands. After dinner, if there were any unfinished tasks, he'd continue to do them. If not, he'd guide Eva in cultivating the holy light. He'd stroll around and chat with Laura, and he'd also chat with Mark, Leon, Jonah, and others. When the time was almost up, David would contemplate and cultivate the holy light for a while, then rest or play games, depending on whether Laura was around. Days like these made David feel incredibly fulfilled, especially as he watched the various underground facilities being laid out, and the outlines of his own residence gradually taking shape. Floyd and Gareth Stanton had finally selected the recruits they were looking for, gathering a group of 20 and beginning training. These 20 recruits were primarily miners who had followed Van Cleef from Azeroth. They were young, free from burdens, and in excellent physical condition. This delighted Gareth and Floyd greatly, and their initial amusement at the Lord's Winter Knights title morphed into a moment of intense anticipation. The two Royal Guards Knights believed that with such exceptional recruits, the formation of a true knightly order in Wintertown was not impossible. While they might not rival the kingdom's elite knights, like the Knights of the Iron Tree, an elite cavalry order commanded by knights, they could certainly achieve the feat. Filled with anticipation, the two men felt no resistance to their relatively unfamiliar colleague, Krauser. After all, both had lived in Wintertown for some time and were familiar with firearms. The lords practiced their marksmanship daily. After witnessing the power of the Garen rifles shipped from Ironforge, the two of them naturally had no objection to the soldiers learning how to use them. While the new recruits were training, the veterans, in addition to their regular drills, were patrolling the area. To help ease the burden on the soldiers, RC, who remains in Wintertown, offered to help, marking the first appearance of motorized infantry in Wintertown. The veterans, clad in plate armor and carrying Garen rifles, were receiving firearms instruction from Krauser. Because they were on a mission, the first batch of Garen rifles were immediately issued their own rifles after Fording delivered them. Then, they would mount motorcycles transformed by RC, Clolia, or Area and patrol the surrounding outposts. Meanwhile, Howard Wolowitz and his men, having obtained the necessary materials from Laura, had finally built Wintertown's first aircraft. To say they had built it wasn't quite right, they simply replaced the engine of the famous Mosquito helicopter with a crystal engine. According to Howard's calculations, this world's lightest helicopter, weighing just over 700 kilograms, only needs a fist-sized piece of crystal ore to fly until it's scrapped. Even the energy in the crystal ore won't be depleted. This means that the Mosquito helicopter has no range limit and can remain aloft as long as the pilot can hold on. If possible, we should get a better aircraft. David began to consider acquiring a Harrier fighter jet for modification. With just one Harrier, Wintertown would have a good overview of the entire northern situation. The Harrier was chosen because it can take off and land vertically, making it suitable for Wintertown's lack of an airport runway. As for the F-35, which can also take off and land vertically, it's unlikely to be available at the moment. Oh, by the way, Steve has a Quinjet, which can also take off and land vertically. With the transformers in the territory and the steadily increasing strength of the people, moving some large machinery is no longer a problem. If anyone can't move something, just ask the ambulance for help. David, realizing this, realized that the territory's development could be even faster, such as acquiring some engineering equipment. It would be great if we could recruit the Diggers. David thought he could find some time to ask Ratchet about the storyline in his world. Hercules had appeared in the second Transformers film, albeit in a hideously ugly version, but Transformers could adjust their appearance. The real question was, how could the Diggers escape the Decepticons? Or perhaps, after Hercules was killed by a human electromagnetic cannon, he could bring the dead Diggers to Azeroth himself. Using his authority over Azeroth, he could use the vast holy light to resurrect them and light-forge them. He wasn't sure if this plan would work, but it was worth making a note of. While David was making various plans for the future, everyone in Wintertown was busy, each busy with their own affairs. After Laura's third trip north with Sylvanus, she finally found the northern giant wolves she had been longing for. They were a pair of injured giant wolves, the female pregnant. After happily taming the two giant wolves, Laura announced that after the she-wolf gave birth to her pups, anyone in Wintertown willing to learn hunter knowledge could receive one. For example, David, Sylvanus, Krauser. By the way, how many new farmers have arrived in Wintertown recently? You mean after Marty and Diogo? Yes, David didn't even bother to count, simply holding out his hand. 3. Laura was a little surprised. This time, she and Sylvanus had traveled quite a distance, spending many days out in the wild, yet only 3 new farmers arrived. So few? Were they all stopped by the surrounding villages? Well, according to these new farmers, we've encountered many who wanted to come to Wintertown along the way, but most of them stayed in SYNOPSIS and the surrounding villages. For these people, the reason they wanted to go to Wintertown was to secure their own farmland. Farmland could be obtained in SYNOPSIS and the surrounding villages, so there was no need to insist on going to Wintertown. Aren't these people going too far? Laura glanced at David, noticing he wasn't angry at all. You're not angry? Are you ready to take action against them? Action? David glanced at Laura and immediately waved his hand, signaling he had no such intentions. Don't accuse me, he said. There's no need for me to do anything. I'm looking forward to this winter. Laura was clever enough to understand David's point. Do you think they won't have enough supplies to survive the long, cold winter on the northern plains this year? Of course, Wintertown's crops thrived and yielded well, not just because of high-yield crops like potatoes, but more importantly because the land in Wintertown had been optimized. The northern plains outside Wintertown didn't have this special land bonus. Perhaps even Sean Forrester, the mayor of Frostbite Town to the northeast, hadn't realized this, let alone these newcomers. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelists. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 156 Winter City Planning Draft. Although Sean Forrest's Frost Town had been established the previous year, due to lack of time, not much farmland had been cultivated, and naturally, not much food had been grown. They had only confirmed that potatoes, a new crop, could grow successfully in this barren land, and then a long, harsh winter arrived. Frost Town survived its first winter relying on family support, as Forrest had yet to fully grasp the harsh environment of the northern plains. As the new year arrived, more wasteland was reclaimed and cultivated. Sean Forrest soon realized that this barren land could only grow potatoes. The other crop seeds they had brought from Iron Tree Keep would struggle to survive and germinate in this soil. Moreover, potatoes, without a mysterious power to enhance them, could not be grown continuously. After 2 harvests, Sean Forrest would find that the crops in his fields were dwindling, and there was no way to sustain Frost Town's growing population for the entire winter. If the Forrest family did not transport sufficient supplies in the fall, Frost Town would face a difficult winter. As for the villages surrounding Wintertown, David was curious how many would remain after a winter. So, before we arrived, the environment here was so harsh. Listening to David's description, Laura first grasped the barrenness and desolation of the place. Her previous impression of the plains came primarily from Wintertown. Under David's rule, the town didn't feel barren at all. Wintertown's farmland was highly productive. As Mark planted more and more crops, the variety of produce was growing. It was said that the newly planted strawberries had already sprouted, and this year they would be able to enjoy Wintertown's own strawberries, grapes, and other fruits. Speaking of agricultural products, David wondered if he should grow cotton in Wintertown. Otherwise, would the entire town's clothing have to be imported through trade? And silk fabrics. Wintertown's environment might not be suitable for silkworms, but he could ask Squirtle for help. He remembered the spider-like Pokemon, or Silk, which could produce large quantities of silk, and the silk was of excellent quality. Silk products were made from that very same silk in that world. After sharing these ideas with Laura, Laura agreed with David's idea, but the topic was suddenly turned to another direction. Then you can make the things you like in Wintertown, right? What are you talking about, men? Laura looked as if she had seen through everything. Are you disappointed that I didn't choose those pairs of stockings? How could that be? David shook his head. Anyway, that kind of thing is easy to buy, huh? Laura laughed dryly, and was quite speechless about David's reply. I thought you were not disappointed because of Eva. David felt the alarm bells ringing in his heart, wondering whether he should start today's game immediately. You've been taking advantage of your secretary these past few days, haven't you? Huh? David gaped, his face a look of surprise, a look of injustice on his face. Why do you say that? Eva and I are completely innocent, really. Laura scrutinized David's face. Knowing him, he was notoriously bad at hiding his true feelings. The look of surprise on his face seemed to be a genuine reaction. Nothing really happened, of course. Hearing David's decisive answer, Laura was puzzled. I've seen Eva so cheerful and content these past few days. I thought she'd finally gotten her way. David was speechless. Laura's words struck him as odd. Come to think of it, I was out for several days this time, and you didn't make a move on Eva. You wasted such a great opportunity." Seeing Laura's antics, David wondered if this woman was deliberately setting him up. Should he try harder, prove his sincerity? However, David's efforts to express his sincerity were met with only a horse. "How about I hold Eva's hand for you?" After making Laura a cup of honey and feeding her a large drink, the two fell asleep in each other's arms. "Stop thinking about it, get some rest." Laura mumbled something, but it was unclear what she said. By the time he tried to ask, she was already fast asleep. After a night of rest in Laura's arms, David woke up the next morning, refreshed and alert. Leaving Laura to catch up on some sleep, David left the cabin and went straight to Squirtle. After helping David recruit a large group of squirrels and several Eevee, Laura had prepared some equipment for this Squirtle to distinguish it from the original. Sunglasses and armbands became the Squirtle's unique attire. David had even playfully decorated the armband with 5 stripes, signifying its status as the captain of all Pokemon in Winter Town. However, since then, the Pokemon captain has become somewhat slack. David hasn't seen any more Pokemon arriving in Winter Town, and Squirtle, aside from appearing punctually at mealtimes, spends his days sunning himself by the river, swimming, and occasionally catching some seafood for a snack. So, in the mornings, Squirtle might be near the Winter River, and David, upon waking up, headed straight for it. "Huh? Mark? Up so early today?" "No, I didn't get any sleep last night." Mark looked energetic, not like someone who'd been up all night. "Aren't you sleeping normally?" "What's the problem?" "No, it's just that I finally became a true shaman, and I'm so excited I can't sleep." Mark had spent a whole night in the house excitedly, unable to sleep even with nothing to do. He tossed and turned until the early hours, then simply got up. "So, you were waiting here for me?" "Yes." Mark appeared before David simply to share his joy, to show off. "Congratulations." "Thank you." Becoming a true shaman, Mark gained the right to wield elemental power. This elemental power also strengthened Mark. Combined with his previous intense training, fueled by the holy light David had infused him, his physical fitness was already formidable. Combined with the various spells he unleashed by harnessing elemental power, Mark would soon transcend the limits of ordinary humans and become a transcendent being. "Are you going to the Winter River?" "Yes, I have something to discuss with Squirtle." Unless emphasized, the Squirtle everyone referred to was essentially the original Squirtle. He explained to Mark his plan to have Squirtle help find some orb web spiders for Wintertown, and also mentioned his cotton planting plan. "I don't think cotton planting is a high priority." Mark agreed that David's idea was sound, and that David should consider something else. "Have you considered the future layout of Wintertown, or even Winter City?" "Of course I have." Ever since he discovered the connection between the Goldfinger and the territory, David had considered this question more than once. However, since Wintertown hadn't been fully built yet, he wasn't in a rush to share his plans. "I'm fine. So tell me about it." "I'm curious." Mark looked around. The sky had barely begun to brighten, and the residents of Wintertown were already waking up. Watching them line up to wash, fetch water, and then prepare for breakfast and the start of their workday had become a daily routine for the residents of Wintertown. Watching this scene, Mark began to wonder what the future of Wintertown, or Winter City, would look like. At the very least, he wouldn't see these queuing for washing and fetching water. "I only have a rough plan in mind, the details still need to be refined. So, with Winter Fortress as the center, I planned for the southwest to be an agricultural area." David's current plan envisioned the farmland expanding southward, placing it squarely southwest of Winter Fortress. This area, with its proximity to water sources and its flat, expansive terrain, was ideal for agriculture. As for the farmers' housing, they could build houses around the farmland, not far from the town center and within the radius of the originally planned water and electricity lines. The southeast is the main residential area, the northwest is the commercial area, and the northeast is for various institutions, military camps, and so on. David's plan was only a rough division. During actual construction, even the southeastern area designated as residential would undoubtedly include various shops. "That sounds good." David then elaborated on more ideas, such as building various factories in the currently forested area to the north. Important plants like the waterworks would need to be built as far upstream as possible. As for the northern military industry, whose scale and products have yet to be determined, and whose name has only been decided, it would also be located to the north to ensure its protection from Winter City. Docks, shipyards, and other facilities would be built on the western banks of the Winter River. If all of your envisioned construction is completed, this place will definitely no longer be called Winter Town. Mark imagined David's description in his mind, eager to see the actual construction soon. Of course, it will already be Winter Town by then. To truly reach the scale David envisioned, even if all the current population of the Northern Plains were to gather in Winter Town, it wouldn't be enough. I have a question. What's the question? Although you have a clear plan for the future, and Winter Town is currently developing steadily and rapidly, Mark paused before asking his question, but before that, won't you consider building a city wall? David was stunned when he heard the question. He hadn't really considered it. A city wall. If you hadn't mentioned it, I would have forgotten about it. Chapter 157 Extraordinary Gwen. Even after finding Squirtle and asking him to help him find some orb weaver spiders, David and Mark headed back toward Winter Town. He hadn't yet decided on the city wall. Should he build it or not? A wall would make the town safer. In this era, walls still served a vital purpose. Even the newly established Frost Town to the northeast had a simple wooden wall. After a year of development, that wall might be upgraded. David simply didn't want to waste time and energy, as even if he built a wall, it would likely be demolished. According to his current plan, only the Winter Fortress, palace, where he lived would be surrounded by a high wall. However, this wall served a different purpose than a city wall. It would primarily ensure David, as Lord, a private and undisturbed space. As for Winter Town itself, it remained open to the public. Residents weren't surprised that a town on the border of the kingdom lacked a wall. The construction site served as a constant reminder that the town was still under construction. Still struggling? Yes, I think if you're struggling, it means you have a clear answer in mind. Mark hit the nail on the head. If David hadn't been deeply opposed to building a wall, he wouldn't have needed to dwell on it. You're right, I do have a clear answer in mind. David nodded. The city of his dreams had no walls at all, and he was confident in the speed of his territory's development. Most importantly, he was confident in his territory's defenses. If necessary, David could cast a large summoning spell, summoning targets including but not limited to, members of the Avengers, the Autobots currently on Earth, the Knights of the Silver Hand and the Kingdom of Lordaeron's army, and the Rangers of Quel'Thalas. With that lineup, he honestly didn't believe anyone could conquer Winter Town. Instead of wasting time, energy, and resources on building a wall, it would be better to build more residential buildings and rent them out at low prices to attract more civilians to settle in Winter Town. Once Winter Town's infrastructure was complete and the current residents had their own homes, he would no longer provide free food and lodging. Winter Town will officially end its current model at that time and transition to a more normal state. Artisans will receive fair wages for their work, including Lord David, who will also provide reasonable compensation for recruiting artisans outside of emergencies. The trade of various goods will also normalize, and the canteen will naturally disappear. Villagers will now cook at home. Those seeking a better life can go to the restaurant promised to Jonah, or to restaurants and eateries opened by others. Of course, normalization also means David will have to start collecting taxes. In addition to the basic agricultural tax, David will also need to establish a relatively reasonable commercial tax. A chaotic stream of thoughts raced through his mind, diverting his thoughts far away. It wasn't until Mark gently patted himself that he snapped back to reality. What? David didn't need to wait for Mark's response. Seeing a shadowy figure not far away, he understood why Mark had suddenly interrupted his wandering thoughts. Who's coming? David looked over. They were now on the west side of Winter Town. Beyond them lay the fields where Mark often tested new crops, and beyond that was Jonah's canteen. Mark and I walked a few steps forward, standing right in front of the shadowy figure. We quickly recognized the newcomer. He was a young man, seemingly no more than 20 years old. They exchanged glances and nodded in unison. Yes, I know this guy. Turning back to the young man, he was surveying his surroundings in wonder, confused as to how he had suddenly wandered from the city to the wilderness. Hello, and welcome to Winter Town. I'm Mayor David, and this is Mark. My name is Peter Parker. May I ask where this is? Peter Parker's question caused David and Mark to exchange glances again. Mark then inquired, are you going, or am I? Seeing David give him a please come gesture, David began to explain his current situation to the renowned figure before him. David stood quietly by, enjoying the various amusing reactions of his familiar figure. Peter's incredulous reaction to hearing that he was not only far from Queens, but also off the familiar Earth, was particularly amusing. By the time Mark finished explaining the situation, Peter Parker pressed his hands to his head, still in disbelief. "You're kidding me, aren't you? Try walking backwards, and imagine returning to your own world." David pointed in the direction of the Winter River. "You'll know we're serious." Peter glanced back at the vast expanse of the river not far away and decided to give David's suggestion a try. True or false, he'd know once he tried. There was no point dwelling on it. But before he could move, he was startled by a translucent figure suddenly appearing in front of him. "What the hell is that? Oh, it looks like someone else has arrived." Mark observed the new figure in surprise. Then, he said to Peter beside him, "If you're not in a hurry, you can wait here for a while. By the way, that's how you appeared just now." "You mean I appeared just like that?" Peter began to believe he had truly traveled to another world, otherwise, this scene would be hard to explain. What kind of high-tech technology was used? He didn't think anyone would go to such lengths just to trick an ordinary high school student like him. What's the principle behind this? Quantum teleportation? Or a wormhole? It must be some mysterious being's special ability. Mark glanced at David as he spoke, but David, acting as if he hadn't heard anything, continued to stare at the shadowy figure. It wasn't long before the shadowy figure gradually took shape and quickly transformed into a real person. It was a young girl with long platinum hair and a black hairpin. Unlike Peter Parker's previous reaction, this girl immediately took several steps back when she realized she was suddenly in an unfamiliar place with three strange men standing before her. "Who are you?" The girl glanced around again, surprised to find herself in such a desolate place, but she remained calm and didn't react aggressively. "Where is this place?" This time, Mark preemptively gestured to David. "Please." Peter, watching the two men, realized they had seen many people from other worlds before, otherwise, they wouldn't be so adept. "Hello, this is Wintertown. I'm Mayor David." Seeing the young woman, David offered a reassuring reassurance. "Don't worry, we mean no harm. You're here because of a mysterious force." He briefly explained the situation in Wintertown and how to leave. He remained silent throughout, which somewhat eased the girl's guard. Finally, David pointed to Peter next to him. "This Peter Parker, like you, just arrived here. He's trying to leave." "What? Me? Oh. I actually believed what you said before." Peter pointed to the girl in front of him. Seeing the strange scene, he half believed he had truly entered another world. The young woman looked around again and asked David uncertainly, "I just need to walk in this direction, thinking of home, and I can leave." "Yes, if I want to come back here anytime, I can come back." "That's right." Without hesitation, the young woman turned and walked away, her figure quickly vanishing into thin air. "Wow," Peter exclaimed. Seeing the magical sight again, he truly believed what Mark had said to him before. How magical. Then he asked David, the mayor, "Are there many people like me from other worlds in this town?" David nodded and pointed directly at Mark next to him. Mark coughed lightly twice and solemnly reintroduced himself. "Formally introduce, I'm Mark Watney, a member of the Mars Exploration Program, an unlucky guy who was left alone on Mars due to an accident." "No way." Peter stretched out his hand in disbelief and shook Mark's hand. "You are an astronaut who landed on Mars? And you are trapped on Mars? Oh, so, if you take the initiative to return to your own world now, you will return to Mars." "Yes." Mark remembered that he could now take people to his own world. "How about it? Are you interested in visiting Mars?" "Are you serious?" Peter was surprised and happy, still not quite believing that he would encounter such a lucky thing. "Can you really take me to Mars for a visit? We just met. Aren't you worried about causing any bad influence?" "I am very confident in you." Mark looked at his right hand that had not been released. "Peter Parker, the famous Spider-Man, or call you the Amazing Spider-Man." When Mark and David saw this face and the name Peter Parker, they confirmed his identity. The fact that this Peter Parker wasn't wearing glasses suggested he had already acquired superpowers. Having his secret identity suddenly revealed, Peter panicked, unsure how to respond. Fortunately, the young woman who had left earlier reappeared and came to his rescue. "It's incredible. I can actually travel freely to another world." After exclaiming in amazement, the girl looked at the three men staring at her and, with a smile, introduced herself. "I was a little rude earlier, but this is too unbelievable. I'm so glad to be here and to see you all. I'm Gwen Stacy." Chapter 158, Summer Resort Wintertown. Gwen Stacy. It wasn't David or Mark who called out in surprise, but Peter. His reaction caught the attention of the girl across from him named Gwen. What's wrong? No, nothing. I have a friend with the same name, she must be a very beautiful girl. After hearing the other person's explanation, Gwen Stacy didn't ask any further questions. Sharing the same name wasn't unusual. She was more curious about this place called Winter Town. What kind of town was it? What kind of world was it in? Although it looked remote and backward from the surroundings, the beautiful natural scenery was still very attractive. If you could travel back and forth freely, it would be a perfect place for an outing, a vacation, or just to relax. After the group introduced themselves, David also gave the two newcomers a general overview of Winter Town, including the Kingdom of Tiran, the Northern Plains, and Winter Town. David also mentioned the forests, vast rivers, grasslands, and harsh winters. He remarked that while winters here were difficult, summers were a perfect escape. He led the group into town, explaining that Winter Town was home to many outsiders like them, including the very Mark Watney before them. The two young men also explained their origins in more detail. Peter Parker explained that he lived in Queens, New York, and was a high school student. Gwen Stacy, on the other hand, said she was also from New York and a high school student. As they entered the town, chatting, the two newcomers began to observe the locals and soon noticed that most were heading north. Glancing slightly north, they both spotted a construction site in the north of the town. What's being built there? The real Winter Town, David explained. As you can see, this place is still quite primitive. Mainly because Winter Town was established not long ago, these wooden houses are just temporary residences. I see. As he spoke, Gwen noticed soldiers in full armor appearing and marching out of the village. Watching this group of heavily armed knights, Gwen and Peter felt as if they had been transported to ancient times. But these soldiers, besides armor, also carried rifles slung across their backs. What a strange combination. Just as they were about to ask, they saw two more soldiers not joining the jogging group. Instead, the fully armed soldiers each rode a very modern motorcycle and headed out of town. Gwen was stunned, while Peter pointed at the two motorcycles and soldiers in the distance and asked David, "Are those two also from another world like us?" "The car is," David answered Peter with a smile. "The soldiers on the bikes are not." "What do you mean? What does the car is mean?" Did they mean those two vehicles were brought from another world? Just as he was about to ask for more clarification, he saw a pink and purple motorcycle slowly pass by, empty of passengers. As it passed David, Peter and Gwen heard a clear female voice from the motorcycle. "Good morning, David." "Good morning, RC. Elias is looking for you." "I see." David had already spotted Elias, the ceremonial officer, walking quickly toward him. Having risen earlier than usual today, Elias hadn't been able to see David. Seeing the Baron leading a few men from outside town, he wondered, are they going to pick up these two people from nowhere? Although he had an answer in his mind, Elias didn't intend to ask for details, simply doing his job. "Sir, good morning, Elias," David, knowing why he'd come, glanced at the two newcomers beside him. "Have you had breakfast?" Peter and Gwen nodded, indicating they had. Then, the young mayor spoke something completely incomprehensible to the newcomer. The newcomer then headed towards the cafeteria. Peter and Gwen had already learned from passing by that large wooden building that served as the town's cafeteria. "Did you just speak the language of this world, Brenian Common, or the common language of Brenian humans, common human language?" Gwen keenly noticed the key. "Does that mean there are other intelligent races in this world?" Just as she was about to ask what other intelligent races there were, she suddenly saw Sylvanus passing by. "That's an elf." Sylvanus, with her excellent hearing and having previously taught herself English, glanced over. Lately, she'd been going hunting with Laura frequently. She had a deep respect for her abilities as a light ranger and had learned that many of the people in Winter Town came from many different worlds. Seeing David's state, Sylvanus guessed that some newcomers had arrived. Seeing David entertaining the two newcomers, Sylvanus didn't bother him. After a few glances, she exchanged a greeting and went about her business. During her time in Winterhold, Sylvanus had little serious work to do, so she had to find things to do to pass the time. Hunting in the forest with Laura was a pleasant pastime, but it wasn't a daily routine. So, when David asked Sylvanus to help guide the veteran hunter Edis so he could better learn the art of hunting, Sylvanus didn't refuse. However, she made it clear that Addis was too old and she wasn't sure if she could train him to be a competent hunter. David didn't care about the question of whether he was a competent hunter. He wanted Sylvanus to focus on teaching Addis how to harness energy. Initially, Sylvanus didn't believe Addis could master arcane energy, and her judgment was correct. Addis was too old, his physical and mental peaks long past their peak. He was no mere genius, and reaching the mystical realm at his age was practically impossible. But he had David's help. He infused Addis with holy light, allowing his body to slowly recover under its nourishing influence. If Addis could learn how to harness the holy light, or through David's infusion of holy light, gain its recognition and become a true user of it, his physical abilities would not only return to their peak but even reach new heights. David had asked Sylvanus to teach him the art of harnessing energy, particularly the techniques for executing hunter skills. After understanding the details, Sylvanus expressed considerable interest in the job, believing it would be an opportunity to delve into Wintertown's unique class, the Holy Light Hunter. If Addis succeeded according to David's advice, he would become a true Holy Light Hunter. In fact, Addis originally wanted to be a pure hunter and spent some time on his own studying hunter knowledge, but unfortunately, he failed to successfully change classes. Instead, Alfie, who had been practicing along the way, showed considerable potential and even caught Sylvanus's attention. Because of Alfie's casual instruction, David, seeing how much she enjoyed teaching others, even handed Clouser to the Ranger General, euphemistically saying, "Teaching 1, 2, 3, makes no difference." In fact, besides Sylvanus, Liadrin was also helping Addis to better mobilize and utilize the holy light, while also teaching him how to correctly perceive it. In Liadrin's eyes, a true priest of the holy light, relying on Lord David Glamorgan to instill the holy light was not a long-term solution. Truly comprehending this power was the correct path. However, Addis didn't have much talent for understanding the holy light, especially when Liadrin said, "If you really can't understand the holy light, think of Lord Glamorgan, the embodiment of the holy light." Addis, David, unaware of Liadrin's usual teachings, was introducing the two newcomers to their fellow citizens of Wintertown. Transformers, as elves, high elves, mages, and other beings once thought only of fantasy could now be found in Wintertown. Peter and Gwen were thrilled. If they hadn't remembered they still had school to go to, they would have stayed in Wintertown for a while, getting to know all these amazing beings. Peter, knowing so much about this place, was less concerned about Mark revealing a secret identity. Compared to Transformers, high elves, and arcane mages, Spider-Man's identity wasn't anything special. He was actually happy to have a place where he could share his secrets. According to David, he could travel between the two worlds at will, and this place seemed like a perfect base for his secrets. As for the girl with the same name as the one he liked, he felt a strange sense of familiarity, even though they were strangers. When the two decided to leave together, Peter laughed and speculated, "Maybe we're from the same world. In that case, I must meet the girl with the same name as me." After waving goodbye to Peter, Gwen waved to David and Mark, then disappeared as a shadow. Watching Gwen and Peter leave one after another, David finally asked the question he had been holding back for a long time. "This Gwen Stacy looks so familiar. Gwen Stacy from the third part of the old trilogy. Haven't you seen that version of Spider-Man?" David was stunned, and then he searched for the corresponding scene in the corner of his memory. "Gwen is in the old trilogy? I have no impression of her at all." Chapter 159 New Transformation Module. When David thought of the third Spider-Man film, his first memories were Bully Maguire, "I'll throw dust in your eyes," and awkward dancing. When it came to specific characters, he could think of Venom, Sandman, and the Green Goblin, but he couldn't recall the Gwen character. The mention of Gwen first reminded him of Stone from The Amazing Spider-Man, then Spider-Gwen from the animated film Spider-Verse. So, there are three versions of Gwen. His wandering thoughts sparked a newfound understanding, and David recalled that this Gwen Stacy looked familiar to him, not just because she was a character from the original Spider-Man trilogy, but also because another character had left a lasting impression on people worldwide. Ah! The woman who pissed off the T-Rex, tapping his left palm lightly. David was proud of his memory, which allowed him to recall anything if he tried hard and had the clues. Then he began to worry, could this Gwen's reward be a speed bonus for wearing high heels? After breakfast, Mark went to show off his shaman status to the others. David sat at a long table, chatting with Ratchet. Ever since his experience of being washed by the holy light in Azeroth, Ratchet had been fascinated by this mystical power. He explained that after that experience, his spark had undergone some unexplained changes, and he wanted to study this knowledge with David to make more accurate judgments. Besides studying holy light knowledge with David, Ratchet would also discuss it with Liadrin when David was busy. Ratchet was undoubtedly the third best person in Winterfell when it came to holy light knowledge, but he didn't possess it himself, so he was only a theorist. After chatting with Ratchet for a while, Eva arrived. She listened to David and Ratchet's discussion, occasionally raising questions of her own. For example, can Autobots also learn the holy light? I don't know, David said, throwing up his hands. He truly didn't know if Autobots could truly master the holy light. In some ways, Cybertronians are intelligent beings, and some possess powerful transformers who possess mysterious powers. Theoretically, it should be possible. I think I can learn it, Eva. Ratchet and David had been chatting for a while, and their understanding of the holy light was growing. Furthermore, the spark within him was constantly changing. As a transformer with remarkable medical abilities, Ratchet was intimately aware of every detail of his body, influenced not only by his own expertise but also by the characteristics of his race. I just don't know if, after mastering this miraculous power of the holy light, I can use it to heal my fellow Cybertronians. If you can, then you should be able to. This time, David's answer was quite certain. The spark was most important to Cybertronians. If Ratchet mastered the holy light, he should be able to use it to restore damaged or weakened sparks of other Cybertronians. Physical injuries were relatively easy to treat. Just like human skin and flesh can be healed, the mechanical bodies and parts of Cybertronians can also be healed. Why couldn't Bumblebee's vocalization device be restored? David wasn't sure about that. Perhaps the spark wasn't strong enough, or perhaps it was just to maintain his cute persona. Speaking of this, David suddenly remembered that he could ask Ratchet more about the spark and the Transformers. He had a lot of questions about his Cybertronian body, too. The Cybertronian body wasn't something to be ashamed of. David said he wanted to ask Ratchet some questions, then demonstrated his Cybertronian transformation. Outwardly, he was still the same David, and Eva, standing nearby, didn't notice any change. But Ratchet immediately noticed something different about David, not like the time in Azeroth, when David was enveloped in a vast energy. Ratchet wasn't sure what David was doing. This is a power I acquired a while ago. David didn't explain how he acquired it. He himself didn't understand the principle, and he couldn't explain it. Ratchet didn't want to ask any more questions. He was simply curious about David's situation. Your state is a bit like that of a hermit warrior. It's a shame we don't have hermit warriors among the Autobots. Hermit warriors aren't common among Cybertronians these days, and they're mostly on the Decepticon side. I just wanted to ask, can this state of mind continue to change, or rather, upgrade? David then displayed his mecha form. It was taller and sturdier than his human form, and its black paint job gave it a rather intimidating look. As for the fact that it resembled Optimus Prime, Ratchet wasn't particularly impressed. What do you mean? I only have these two modes right now. If I want to acquire vehicle form, what should I do? Oh, that, Ratchet said it was easy. It just required upgrading the spark, hardware, and modules. Upgrading the spark was the most important and difficult. Adding hardware and modules was relatively straightforward. Your spark is very powerful, so you only need to add the necessary hardware and modules to achieve new transformation modes. How do I do that? I can help you with the car modules, but I can't help with the flight or tank modules. Ratchet explained that he lacked the data for those modules. If David wanted to acquire them, the easiest way would be to find the corresponding Decepticon and obtain the necessary data and hardware. It doesn't sound that difficult. David had thought upgrading his Cybertronian form would be a difficult task, but from what Ratchet said, it didn't seem that difficult. Why, after all these years of fighting between the Autobots and the Decepticons, hadn't the Autobots received flight or chariot data from the Decepticons? To gain more powerful transformation modes? Because of the spark, Ratchet reiterated. For Cybertronians, their spark was the most important thing, and most Cybertronian spark wasn't strong enough to support such an upgrade. Furthermore, some unknown reasons limited most Cybertronians to only two forms. David's case was unique. His spark was incredibly powerful, but Ratchet wasn't sure if he could achieve more transformations. I can make you a car-shaped module first and see if it works. Is it a hassle? No, just a moment, it'll be done soon. Ratchet spoke quickly, and it was indeed completed quickly, taking only 2 or 3 minutes, including the data transmission time. David, feeling as if he had received a new compressed file, unzipped and installed the new template, only to see various new prompts appear on his display screen. Loading land vehicle form data module. Loading land vehicle form. Missing land vehicle data. David looked at the missing vehicle data on the display screen and turned to glance at the ambulance. The ambulance understood and immediately transformed into its vehicle form, a yellow Hummer search and rescue vehicle. David's eyes shot out a beam, scanning the Hummer. Obtaining land vehicle data. Low hardware match. David stared at the prompt for 2 seconds, stunned. There was no yes or no option. By the time the subtitles appeared, he had a clearer understanding of the details. After scanning the Hummer that the ambulance had transformed into, David obtained the vehicle's data. He could indeed transform into this vehicle and set it as his default vehicle form. However, the low match prompted him to give up. So, Transformers choose their vehicle form based on compatibility, right? David, freed from his Cybertronian form, thanked the ambulance lane. It was then that he noticed Eva, beside him, completely stunned, staring at him with her eyes wide open and her mouth slightly open. Scared? No, Eva shook her head immediately. Just amazed. How could you become like this? I don't know why, I just suddenly gained this ability. Think of it as some kind of superpower. Oh, David glanced at Eva, a thought suddenly forming. You want this ability too? Seeing Eva shaking her head like a rattle, David knew she had no interest in becoming a robot. What a shame. David was actually curious if she could transform into a base vehicle. The mention of a base vehicle suddenly struck David. A base vehicle is also a vehicle. Could he scan it himself? If he could transform into a base vehicle, returning to Wintertown and instantly becoming Winter Base, could he change his name to Mighty Handsome? After hearing David's outlandish idea, Eva and Ratchet, who had just learned what the base vehicle was, fell silent. Eva was debating whether she should help David complete this plan. While she would need to return to her own world, with David by her side, it shouldn't be dangerous, right? Besides, they both had the ability to return to Wintertown at any time. Ratchet was considering that if David could truly transform into such a powerful transformer, perhaps it would be the right choice for the Autobots, or even non-Decepticon Cybertronians, to come in live in Wintertown. Seeing the two of them fall silent, David didn't press the issue further. Instead, he turned back to the warehouse to scan the Weasel again. It was clear that David, without the tank module, was completely incompatible with the Weasel ultralight tank. Even force transformation was impossible, so he had to abandon the idea. After returning, Ratchet said slowly, I don't think you can transform into such a powerful vehicle. Chapter 160 Northern Plains Autumn Strategy. Spring passed, summer arrived. Wintertown hadn't undergone any significant changes since the arrival of the two newcomers. Gwen Stacy and Peter Parker were both academically busy high school students. Having chosen no leisurely education, they diligently studied every day. Furthermore, Peter's busy and uncertain part-time job as Spider-Man, in addition to school, meant he had little time for David. Upon learning that David's Wintertown wouldn't be fully operational until at least winter, Peter put his plans for his new secret base on hold. Gwen Stacy, on the other hand, would occasionally visit, at least getting to know everyone in town. Furthermore, Gwen expressed a keen interest in the mystical powers of Wintertown, declaring she would definitely stay there for a while during the summer to thoroughly study their mystical knowledge. David, of course, wouldn't object to Gwen's idea. He was curious, if Gwen, still a high school student, mastered some mysterious power, would she compete for work with her own Spider-Man? Becoming New York's next superhero? That would be quite an interesting prospect. Of course, David simply lamented that he didn't have one of those mutant spiders. Otherwise, he could simply let his spider bite Gwen and create a Spider-Gwen. Turning this Gwen into Spider-Gwen would be a bit more difficult now. Instead, the chances of creating a Paladin Gwen, a Priest Gwen, or a Ranger Gwen were higher. Speaking of mystical powers, after observing them for a while, David was very pleased with Gareth Stanton and Floyd's performance and began formally teaching the two Knights of the Guard the Holy Light. Although the two knights had long known that their sworn Lord Baron of Glamorgan possessed some mystical power, they hadn't expected the Baron to be so generous as to teach them. They immediately knelt on one knee, reiterating their lifelong loyalty to the Baron. Then, with tears of gratitude, they accepted the guidance and instruction from David, Ratchet, Liadrin, Laura, and others. From that day on, the two knights, like their fellow knight Krauser, were plunged into the abyss of learning. Gareth, Floyd, and Krauser will be in charge of the Winter Knights. Gareth Stanton will be the leader and commander of the Winter Knights, while Floyd will serve as deputy and oversee the training of new recruits. Krauser is currently solely responsible for firearms training, and David has yet to decide on his future role. With Krauser's abilities, he's more suited to leading a dedicated special operations team. This can be determined later. After some deliberation and finalization, David had Laura obtain the HKS pistol blueprints and send them to Ironforge, where he'll have the dwarven craftsman help craft a batch of enhanced US pistols. David named the Ironforge produced .45 caliber US pistols pianos, a name he picked out because they were primarily black and white, actually silver, and had a very melodious sound when fired, resembling a moving piece of music. This was all David's nonsense, and even the dwarves found it outrageous. However, the weapons were custom-made, and the naming rights belonged to them. The first batch of 20 piano pistols produced included 5 left-handed pistols, and an additional batch of muzzle brakes was also produced. Seeing Leon wielding the black and white piano pistol with a muzzle brake, David nodded in satisfaction, believing that Leon, now armed with a two-handed greatsword, could easily decimate the villages controlled by the Spanish Church of Light. We also need to make a batch of special magazines. He wouldn't assign this task to the dwarves, but would instead assign it to Will Turner and Pierre Newton. After crafting a number of stored wristbands, the old alchemist hadn't had time to rest when David caught him in the act and assigned him a new task. This time, it was to craft another storage item, an expanded magazine that could hold more ammunition. David's requirements were modest. He only needed to make a batch capable of holding 100 rounds. Oh, that's not difficult. Newton, already familiar with all the strange and bizarre things in Wintertown, knew what a magazine was. Before that, expand the magazine of my Holy Light Hunter to 120 rounds. That's not difficult, but I must warn you, once the Holy Light Hunter has this special property attached to it, it can't be stored in a normal storage item. Is that so? David hesitated upon hearing this. He had finally acquired a storage item, but it felt a bit lacking if he couldn't store all his weapons and equipment. Then, when the storage item gets better, can I put the modified Holy Light Hunter in it? Of course, otherwise how will I store the special ore? However, Newton had no intention of upgrading David's storage item. As mentioned before, researching, analyzing, and personally modifying this kind of equipment is also a form of training. David didn't make any requests in this regard. He decided to continue to work hard on improving his alchemy skills. Perhaps by then, he would even be able to modify the Holy Light Hunter's magazine with his own alchemy. Anyway, for now, the Holy Light Hunter's smaller ammunition capacity didn't affect David much, and using a revolver-specific loader wasn't particularly troublesome. Just make some extended magazines for the piano pistols, 20 piano pistols, 1 magazine for each plus 2 spares. Under normal circumstances, carrying 300 rounds of ammunition is enough for most situations. By the time Will can produce more powerful ammunition, 300, or even 600 rounds, Leon might barely have a chance to swing his sword, and that parasite-infested village will be gone. David prioritized Pierre Newton's production of extended magazines. One reason was that, according to his estimation, Leon's mission to rescue the president's daughter, the plot of Resident Evil 4, was imminent. Even without Krauser's involvement, the probability of the Cult of the Light attacking Ashley Graham was still high, so David was making some advanced preparations. Besides Leon's situation, there was another reason. After a period of quiet and boring days, Laura was once again tempted to venture out. This time, she wasn't targeting the dangerous world of Azeroth, but rather Will Turner's Caribbean world. Laura suddenly remembered that Will's world also had many strange things to discover. She was quite interested in the Cursed Gold, the Sealed Poseidon, the Fountain of Youth, Poseidon's Trident, and so on. David had originally considered visiting Caribbean world as a vacation, but after receiving a tip from Ratchet, he decided to let Laura and her friends go to Will's place. He was more interested in the Transformers world than the Caribbean world. He had heard that Sam was going to college. He remembered clearly that the beginning of the second Transformers film was Sam's college enrollment, which marked the beginning of the second film's plot. David would go there to collect data on transformation modules. For example, the flight module could be obtained from Skyfire. As for the hardware required for flight mode, that would depend on the situation. The most important thing was to see if he could bring the hideous corpse of Hercules to Azeroth and resurrect it as a loyal digger team. If successful, David would gain a construction team even more powerful than the Azerothian craftsmen, and the digger's ability to build modern structures far surpassed the existing craftsmen in Winterfell. So, Are these the goals you're going to accomplish, and have already accomplished, this year? Looking at the various items David had written in his notebook, Laura felt it was too much, too complex, and too chaotic. She spent a long time trying to make sense of the connections. There weren't any. David was really just writing whatever came to mind. Do you have to sort through this jumble of information every day? No, he doesn't do that often. Eva, as David's de facto assistant, helping him with various tasks, understood the situation better. Usually, when this happens, it means they've completed a phase of their plan and need to think carefully about what to do next. Honestly, I can't tell what he's planning to do next. Can you? Laura glanced at the notebook spread out on the table, then at David, who was rubbing his temple and occasionally writing a few more words. Seeing his expression, she stood behind David and gently massaged his temple. David lowered his left hand, enjoying Laura's massage, and continued to wonder if he had missed anything. I don't know, Eva pondered for a moment, but couldn't come up with an answer. Finally, David took the initiative to explain. Don't overthink it. I just want to make sure nothing's been overlooked, so that Wintertown can smoothly enter a new phase in the fall, autumn. Laura looked puzzled. What will happen in the autumn? If I'm not mistaken, this autumn on the northern plains will be very lively. David didn't play any suspense and directly announced the answer. There are so many villages around here, but they can't grow enough food. What do you think will happen to those villages, relying on family support like Forest? That's unrealistic. Not all nobles have such wealth. Moreover, these villages have intercepted a large number of immigrants from other places. What will these new immigrants think when they find that the land they've worked so hard to cultivate is not enough to support them? When survival becomes a problem, what will they do? David didn't care about the surrounding villages' interception. In fact, he was just waiting for this to happen. Chapter 161 Super Talent for Firearms. The new immigrants were discontent, and these villages had only a few solutions: purchase sufficient food from Iron Tree Fort. There were now at least a dozen newly established villages across the northern plains. If everyone bought food together, it would drive up the price of food in Iron Tree Fort. Less affluent nobles would then be unable to afford it. Furthermore, these new immigrants who had come so far north were not simply peaceful commoners. They had left their homes, dissatisfied with their former poverty, and fled here. How could these less honest farmers tolerate worse conditions in the northern plains? Conflict would undoubtedly erupt in these villages. To deflect conflict, inter-village clashes were likely to occur. The big fish preying on the small fish is a common phenomenon in nature. Powerful nobles would likely seize the resources of weaker nobles to ensure the stability of their own villages. So, if we do nothing, those surrounding villages might just start fighting among themselves. Eva and Laura were both a little surprised after hearing David's words. After listening to David's analysis, they knew the situation in the villages of the northern plains would be difficult, but would it really get to that point? If we don't do that, then we'll just have to give up, pack up and leave the northern plains immediately. As for those farmers, let them go wherever they want. David thought that was the right choice, but how many people would give up so easily when faced with a choice? Countless examples, including David's own, have proven that even if the person knows giving up is the right thing to do, as long as there's even a glimmer of hope, they won't make that choice. Giving up means all the previous investments will be wasted, and they're unwilling to bear that loss. So, you hope that Wintertown will complete the reorganization of its army, the manufacture of its equipment, and the stockpiling of its ammunition by autumn, and that everyone can finish their current tasks by autumn. As they spoke, people passed by, like Sylvanus and Liandrin, who stopped nearby to listen to David, Laura, and Eva's conversation. The two high elves, who had been listening, finally interrupted. They also asked me to help teach Addis and Krauser, ensuring they quickly master hunter skills and become qualified rangers. The Knights of the Royal Guard also learned the Holy Light. If all went well, Wintertown's combat effectiveness would be greatly enhanced by autumn. Are you worried that the surrounding villages might attack Wintertown in dire straits? Yes, Sylvanus was right. David was indeed preparing for a possible autumn war, including his own desire to travel to the Transformers world to acquire flight form. Isn't Wintertown the king's territory? Attacking Wintertown would cause a lot of trouble, wouldn't it? When pushed to the limit, you won't worry so much. Initially, these villages wouldn't target Wintertown, especially when there were other vulnerable targets nearby. But with the arrival of winter, food shortages, and a lack of suitable targets for plunder, some would inevitably choose to take risks. Besides, those looting might not necessarily be the nobles. It's not impossible for refugees who can't make ends meet to turn bandit. The group suddenly realized they had indeed overlooked the desperate civilians and farmers. Of course, these refugees and bandits couldn't possibly pose a threat to Wintertown. David simply hoped to minimize the damage. A strong military force would not only protect Wintertown through the winter, but would also serve as a powerful deterrent, forcing them to abandon the option of violence and accept David's suggestions, perhaps becoming Wintertown civilians. This ties into another part of David's plan for the fall, absorbing the villagers fleeing from surrounding towns and villages. With a strong military force, sufficient food and clothing, and shelter to keep ordinary people through the cold winter, this winter would be a crucial period for Wintertown's rapid development. Oh, everyone nodded, fully understanding David's plan. It wasn't complicated. Simply wait for unrest and conflict to erupt in the surrounding towns and villages, and then Wintertown would reap the benefits. It seems like Wintertown's construction is a bit slow. After understanding David's intentions, Laura looked over the various projects written in her notebook and saw which ones were most important. So, I'm thinking of bringing the Digger team to Wintertown. Digger, a Cybertronian infrastructure enthusiast, had made a significant contribution to the city's development, which was why David was so interested. So, you definitely want to visit that world? Yes, then have fun. Laura wasn't planning on going with David. She had already set her own plans and destination, the Caribbean world where Will Turner lived. She didn't need to worry about David's safety. With his current strength, he shouldn't be in any danger there. Would you like to join me on this adventure with Will? Laura had been getting along well with Sylvanus lately, and this time, she was ready to team up with a high elf ranger. Sylvanus didn't refuse. She, too, was curious about the other world, so she quickly agreed. Liadrin had no intention of wandering around. She asked David something. When Wintertown is officially completed, can I build a Church of the Light here? Huh? David was stunned. Did Liadrin mean to stay permanently on the continent of Brunia and cultivate followers of the Holy Light in this world? After thinking about it, he didn't seem to need to refuse. The teachings of the Church of the Light were sound, and there were no extreme ideas. Of course, after a few words, David put away his notebook and prepared to practice shooting. Laura and Sylvanus were with him, while Eva was studying Holy Light knowledge with Liadrin. Unexpectedly, he ran into Steve and Peggy at the shooting range. Seeing the smiles on their faces, David suddenly realized that their relationship was more than just familiar strangers. "Huh. Steve, I caught you," David whispered to Steve while Laura, Sylvanus, and Peggy were greeting each other. He was puzzled by Steve's sudden change of heart. "I'm not dwelling on the fact that the Peggy in this parallel world isn't your Peggy anymore, because I found it pointless to dwell on it. It only wastes precious opportunities." Steve glanced at David, then at Peggy, not far away. When their eyes met, he didn't bother to look away, continuing to stare at her with determination. "Especially after studying magic with the Ancient One, I've learned a lot," David understood immediately. "Did the Ancient One tell you about that future?" "Yes, he even let me see it with my own eyes." With Steve designated as the heir to the Sorcerer Supreme, the Eye of Agamotto, also known as the Time Stone, naturally wouldn't be kept secret from him. Besides, traversing timelines and observing them was something all sorcerers excelled at. Mastering this artifact was essential for becoming the Sorcerer Supreme. Now that Steve knew his future, he naturally stopped dwelling on whether this Peggy wasn't that Peggy. He'd likely have found the other Peggy in his future. For both parties involved, as long as they were willing and didn't mind, it didn't matter. After all, whether the shoe fit or not was all they knew. It seemed Captain Carter of Wintertown didn't care about that either, so their relationship blossomed rapidly. "I'm more worried about Sharon." "What's wrong with Sharon?" "Maybe she has a weird feeling about me and Peggy together." David suddenly realized that for Sharon, the side of Steve and Peggy evoked a strange feeling. Is my mother cheating? Or is my father cheating, even though they weren't actually her parents, merely parallel universe counterparts? She'll figure it out. It just takes time. Steve nodded, letting go of the issue. He simply chastised David. "You all knew my future and didn't even tell me." David dismissed him with a "who told you not to ask." The group continued their shooting practice. Perhaps due to her unusually clear mind lately, Peggy came over to give David some pointers, helping to correct some of his bad shooting habits. Although he often carried a gun around, David's shooting skills were largely self-taught, without formal instruction. Furthermore, Peggy was a skilled shooter herself, even capable of hitting a moving target with a small pistol at long range. David believed that with Peggy's guidance, his shooting skills would improve further. Then, he felt what it meant to have a significant improvement in his shooting skills. Watching the distant bullseye being ravaged by his piano pistol, he felt a bit strange. Peggy's guidance is so effective, he realized the reason in a split second. It wasn't Peggy's guidance that was effective, but Peggy's shooting talent. After arriving in Wintertown for so long, he finally received a reward from Peggy. This time, it must be a talent for shooting. He emptied another standard magazine. The .45 caliber piano pistol only held 12 rounds in a standard magazine, which was why David wanted to manufacture a batch of extended capacity magazines. After removing the empty magazines, David didn't continue practicing shooting, but instead pondered the issue of talent rewards. It's not surprising that Peggy offered the reward. After all, Peggy and I are relatively unfamiliar. However, my relationship with Laura is already so good, but I haven't triggered any more rewards. Or have I already received them, but I just haven't figured out what they are. Chapter 162 Gwen's Attack. Concerned about his talent reward, David ended his shooting practice early today. After saying hello to Laura, who was still practicing dual-gun shooting, and Sylvanus, who had taken an interest in her new pistol and was also learning how to use it, he left the shooting range early. As for Steve and Peggy, they'd already left, presumably to find a date. After walking around the construction site, David returned to the back of his cabin and first visited the crystal mine. Besides his relationship with Laura, which seemed to have reached a new level, his relationship with Eva had also recently grown. He wondered if there had been any new changes at the crystal mine. Since they'd gradually figured out the crystal mine's growth schedule, Will and Mark now waited until the right time to harvest. Normally, no one paid much attention to the warehouse behind David's cabin. Opening the door and stepping inside, David was surprised to find that the crystal mine had indeed changed. From initially growing 2 crystals simultaneously, to later growing 4 at once, and now, while not yet 8, the growth rate and size of each crystal have changed. One crystal has already grown a full circle larger than the mature crystals he'd seen before. The change is quite noticeable. After observing for a while, and confirming that the crystals would need some time to stop growing, David left the warehouse and seriously considered the rewards he had already received and could potentially receive. First, Laura, his closest friend, offered him a talent that allowed him to instantly learn various languages and an archery talent. It seems no more talents have been offered since then, but the changes in the crystals suggest that these talents may gradually increase in strength as their relationship grows. Perhaps Laura wasn't offering new rewards, but rather simply enhancing those two, a fact he hadn't noticed. Fording offered the Holy Light talent and the physical potential of the Azerothian Iron Men. The Holy Light talent aside, it had become his primary strength, and the physical potential from Azeroth had already merged with the talents provided by Squirtle and Leon. Ultimately, it's all about physical improvements, making his body stronger, and with persistent effort, it will only get stronger. David hasn't yet reached the limits of this body, and he has no way of judging whether these talents have been further upgraded. Physical talents gained in the future, unless they're rewards like the Cybertron body, with obvious changes, won't be noticeable, right? In contrast, the mental boosts offered by Steve Rogers are easier for him to detect. Whenever he receives such rewards, the Holy Light reacts immediately, and he naturally knows he's gained this improvement. Unfortunately, only Steve Rogers has offered such rewards so far. I wonder if spiritual talents will be available in the future? The rewards offered by Mark Watney and Eva are all material, but both are steadily increasing, making them the easiest to assess. The continuous improvement of potatoes, land, and the increase in crystal ore and its production capacity are all easily noticeable. Conversely, the skills-specific talents offered by Will, Sharon, and Peggy are easily overlooked without careful consideration. After gathering his thoughts, David began to wonder if Leonard had already given him a reward. What exactly would it be? It certainly wouldn't be an IQ boost. But a boost to his memory wasn't out of the question. Such a reward wouldn't be immediately noticeable. Especially since his own mental power had been steadily improving, his memory was already improving, so it wasn't impossible that he had overlooked the boost from Leonard. Peter and Gwen. After gathering his thoughts, David began to anticipate what reward Peter and Gwen would give him. Considering Peter Parker's Spider-Man persona, perhaps he could receive another reward related to his mental willpower? As for Gwen Stacy, David decided to just be casual, not expecting too much. Just as he was thinking of Gwen Stacy, David saw her figure. She must have just finished school and was here for a stroll because she had nothing else to do. This had become a regular part of Gwen's life lately. Unless she had plans with classmates or friends, she would visit Wintertown. She explained that she was afraid her unique ability would one day disappear. "Good afternoon, David." "Good afternoon. Did you get together with your classmates today?" "We've already made plans to get together tomorrow." Gwen then explained that she finally had a day off, and would have more time, perhaps even more frequent visits to Wintertown. So, David knew Gwen's words would have a follow-up. "So, I want to learn all that mysterious knowledge. Can you teach me?" Gwen had been looking forward to it for a long time. If she hadn't remembered that she was still a high school student and hadn't yet abandoned everything in her world to live in Wintertown, she wouldn't have asked to focus on learning all kinds of mysterious knowledge. "Me," David pointed at himself, and seeing Gwen nod expectantly, he continued. "I only know about the Holy Light and a small part of hunter lore. So, do you want to be a cleric? A paladin? Or a hunter, is that so?" Gwen thought for a moment. Cleric? Hunter? Sounds good. As for paladin, she's a girl, so paladin doesn't seem to suit her. Unaware that David was sizing up Gwen, he secretly thought that Gwen Stacy, with her tall, long legs and impressive physique, would be perfect for a paladin. That way, she wouldn't have to flee when she encountered a Tyrannosaurus Rex. She could just swing a two-handed hammer and crush it to death, and even skin it to make a dinosaur skin handbag or something. Gwen, completely unaware that David saw her as a prime candidate for a powerful female warrior, was still inquiring about the other mysterious powers in Wintertown. Mages? She was somewhat interested, but it was said that the magic knowledge Wintertown currently possessed wasn't very useful in this world. If you want to learn magic, it's best to seek out Gina Proudmoore, the only mage in Wintertown. Gwen didn't want to go to Gina. She'd been in Wintertown for a while, and their relationship wasn't very good. What was the point of learning from a beautiful woman? It was more fun to hang out with handsome men. Since I can't use magic after learning it, I'd better learn something else. Druid? Shaman? Assassin? Warrior? Wintertown has amassed a wealth of druidic lore, but so far, no one in the town has mastered druidic abilities. Conversely, Mark and Steve have mastered shamanic lore, a once extremely fragmented body of knowledge. They've even acquired a remarkably complete body of shamanic lore from the elemental spirits of Azeroth. Mark, while cultivating and organizing it, has recently refined Wintertown's collection of shamanic lore. Now, shamanism has become another profession, besides the Holy Light, with a complete body of knowledge. Assassin, after chatting for a while, Gwen discovered she had a slight interest in this profession that allowed her to disappear, but after hearing about the significant risks associated with stealth, she decided against it. She came to Wintertown to relax, not risk her life. She had no intention of risking her life for some novelty. So, Holy Light? Or Hunter? Let's learn the Holy Light. In that case, you can first seek out Liandrin to learn some Holy Light knowledge, and then try to comprehend it. With only 2 elves in the entire town of Winter, Liandrin was a very conspicuous presence and easy to find. "Can't you teach me? I need to leave Winter for a while to run some errands." David had almost everything arranged. As they spent more time together, Elias and the 2 knights of the Royal Guard learned that Baron Glamorgan occasionally left his domain to attend to matters that were not to be known to them. Gradually realizing their lord's many secrets, the 2 knights no longer insisted on accompanying him. They worked harder to gain his approval, hoping that one day, Baron Glamorgan would be willing to take them with him on his travels. Going on business? Going to another city? Gwen was curious when she heard David was leaving. Or heading to another world, to the world of the ambulance. There was nothing to hide. David's plan was generally known to the many alien visitors in the town. Even Addis was gradually beginning to understand his situation. The world of Transformers were known and familiar in many worlds, and Gwen knew about them. Especially after seeing real Transformers in Wintertown, she had returned to her own world to research them. Upon hearing David was going to that world, Gwen immediately expressed her desire to go too. It might be dangerous. If you really want to go, wait until it's safer. David glanced at the young Gwen, and it was easy to guess what the girl was thinking. Or until you're strong enough and don't have to worry about the dangers. Gwen was a little unhappy at David's clear refusal, but she couldn't think of any reason to convince him to take her with him. At the same time, Gwen realized one thing: if she couldn't become stronger and just remained an ordinary girl, it would be difficult for her to play with David. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 163, Codename Arsenal. Gwen was a smart girl, and her judgment was spot on. As Wintertown developed and David grew stronger, it became increasingly difficult for ordinary people to engage in conversations with him on equal terms. This situation would become increasingly pronounced as David's power and status grew. Of course, Gwen had her share of misjudgments. Someone like her, capable of traveling from another world, was anything but ordinary. He arranged everything, having Eva help him keep an eye on Wintertown as usual. David also met with everyone in town to ensure nothing would be delayed by his absence. After 3 extra days of work, David, with the help of an ambulance, brought the 3 RC sisters to the Transformers world. Before setting off, David had his hair cut short and donned Laura's new clothes: blue jeans, Doc Martens, a white t-shirt, and a black leather jacket. Aside from his hairstyle, he could now perfectly impersonate the perpetual high school student. The storage space Pierre Newton had crafted for David was currently worn on his left wrist in the form of a bracelet. Without a close look, one might mistake it for a watch, but upon closer inspection, it wouldn't be noticeable. It looked like an ordinary decorative item. It contained David's Hammer of Judgment, the Light Hunter, and 120 rounds of high-potency ammunition, a spear made of light-forged iron, various alloys, and crystal ore powder, and a relatively ordinary hunting bow and arrows. Other than that, there were some high-calorie food and water. David had packed essentially everything he usually needed, except for the Lightbringer suit. Sitting in the driver's seat of the ambulance, David surveyed his surroundings. This was a military base, surrounded by a vast array of weapons and military vehicles, numerous armed soldiers patrolling, and guard posts dotted the perimeter. In such an environment, David's Humvee rescue vehicle seemed a bit out of place, not to mention the 3 nearby RC sisters, whose newly transformed motorcycles had projected holographic images of their drivers. "This is the base where the Hive Force is stationed," Ratchet explained. It wasn't until then that David realized the Hive Force wasn't based in the continental United States, but on Diego Garcia Island in the Indian Ocean. It's actually an overseas base. The Hive Force's composition was also complex. Besides North American combatants, there were also soldiers from European countries. Furthermore, the Hive Force enjoyed the support of numerous nations worldwide, allowing it to freely transit and conduct combat missions in numerous countries. David, having only seen the movies before, naturally didn't understand this information. Even if his memory was sky high, he couldn't recall what he didn't know. So, as Ratchet explained it, he listened intently, until the car pulled into a large building and stopped, halting the Hive Force education session. Through the car window, David saw several Autobots, including Optimus Prime, standing in front of him, staring at him. Besides Optimus Prime, Major William Lennox, the frontline commander of the Hive Force, also stood nearby, with his old comrade, Robert Epps, standing beside him. "So many people gathered here? Are you welcoming me?" David shouted, exiting the ambulance. Optimus Prime greeted David while explaining the situation. "Welcome, my friend. This is just proper etiquette." He also took David through some simple immigration procedures. During his time on Earth, Optimus Prime and the Autobots had strictly adhered to Earth's regulations. Every Autobot arriving on Earth was screened and registered. Since Sector 7, the department dedicated to dealing with alien affairs, had been disbanded, these responsibilities were now being handed over to the newly formed Hive Force. This meant that William Lennox and his troops, in addition to working alongside the Autobots to combat the Decepticons invading Earth, also had to handle alien immigration screening and declaration management. After explaining the situation, David then engaged in a conversation with Major William Lennox. "Hello, I'm Major William Lennox." Lennox had been studying the young man before him. Besides being handsome, he didn't see how he looked alien. "Excuse me, are you an Autobot too?" "Technically, I'm not." "Yeah, I see. You don't look like a car." Robert Epps, Lennox's old comrade and the black sergeant who often provided the comedic relief in the film, couldn't help but quip, "You look more like someone who likes to drive." Lennox glanced at his old partner, warning him against such jokes, then glanced at Optimus Prime. He didn't understand what was going on. Hadn't they said they were bringing a friend? Based on previous conversations, he'd assumed it was another Autobot coming to Earth. But this person looked like just an ordinary Earthling, right? But judging by their conversation with Optimus Prime, they definitely weren't from Earth. Who is this person? Could they be some other alien race? Why did all these aliens seem to be flocking to Earth? Lennox felt things were getting a little complicated, and he might have a headache coming up. You're not a Cybertronian. I am indeed a Cybertronian, David had already told Ratchet before arriving. This time, he would travel to his world as a Cybertronian, and he had already used a Cybertronian body before arriving, though now in human form. You're a Cybertronian too, Lennox breathed a sigh of relief, yet also felt a touch of shock. Could Cybertron not only have silicon-based life like the Transformers, but also carbon-based life like humans? That should make it easier to understand. David transformed right in front of Lennox. After a brief sound of transformation, David was complete, transforming from human to machine. Hurried, Epps, ordered to silence, couldn't help but yell. After witnessing an Earthling transform into a machine, he felt that using such a short word to express his feelings was a good way to control himself. What's going on? Lennox stared at the dark mechanical life in front of him, which was somewhat similar to Optimus Prime. He was shocked, but also realized that something was wrong. Cybertronians have the ability to disguise themselves as ordinary humans. Hidden Warriors are a very special group on Cybertron. They can disguise themselves as another life form, and it is difficult to detect any abnormalities before they actively expose themselves. The Hermit Warriors who use the camouflage ability are perfectly disguised in terms of appearance and various life characteristics. Just like David will gain weight in mechanical form, but his weight in human form is almost the same as his original weight. As Lennox listened to Optimus Prime's explanations, he suddenly realized the gravity of the situation. How many Hermit Warriors are there on Cybertron, since the Civil War broke out on Cybertron? Most of the Hermit Warriors have died in the fighting. There aren't many left. Just as Lennox was about to breathe a sigh of relief, he heard another piece of information that gave him a headache. The few Hermit Warriors left are basically with the Decepticons. Lennox glanced at Optimus Prime, then turned to look at his old comrade again, then looked at the Cybertronian named David in front of him. So, although Epps knew that Optimus Prime, the Autobot leader, was a trustworthy comrade, he couldn't help but reach for his gun. The awkward part was that he didn't have one on him. Don't worry, I'm not a Decepticon. David had been observing the group quietly until this moment, finally explaining himself and changing his appearance back to human. However, a big reason I came to Earth this time was because I learned that a Hermit Warrior had arrived. Lennox's temples throbbed. His awful premonition seemed to have come true. Sure enough, a Cybertronian, perfectly disguised as an Earthling, had infiltrated Earth. Worse still, they were actually Decepticons. Fortunately, this Hermit Warrior, David, seemed to be here to help. I'm sorry I can't get any more information on the Hermit Warrior. I need to report to the General immediately, Lennox politely said to David, who had provided crucial intelligence. If you need anything, you can talk to Epps. Finally, welcome to Earth. David shook Lennox's hand, then watched the Major hurried away, his gaze fixed on Sergeant Major Robert Epps. Welcome to Earth. Epps was still looking David up and down, especially glancing down. Can a Hermit Warrior perfectly transform into another life? I know what you want to ask. All I can say is, it's even more perfect than you think. Oh, Epps sighed enviously and asked another question. So, are Hermit Warriors like you only able to disguise themselves and sneak in to perform special missions? Or do you have powerful combat capabilities like other Cybertronians? Well, David switched to his mechanical form again and displayed all the weapons he currently had. You may not know, my code name is Arsenal. Arsenal. Chapter 164 Choose a New Skin. Ratchet had told the other Autobots some time ago that David had the ability to transform into a Cybertronian. So when David showed his Cybertron form to Lennox and Epps, the Autobots weren't surprised. But they were also curious about what David's Cybertron form looked like and what abilities it possessed. Now that the Autobots had seen it, they felt that David in this state was indeed a true Cybertronian. As for his weapons and equipment, they even drew Ironhide's admiration. This looks cool. I think you should keep it like this. If you do that, it might cause some people to get overly nervous. David put away all the weapons on his body. He had noticed that more than 1 or 2 guards were looking at him with vigilance. Robert Epps, standing before him, simply admired David's weaponry. "If I can carry so many weapons on a mission, then I wouldn't be afraid to face the Decepticons alone. Perhaps there will be such an opportunity in the future." After a brief chat, Epps took charge of arranging David's accommodations. Since David's body was similar to that of a normal human and he moved around in human form, Epps would arrange a temporary room for David. "By the way, do you need to eat and drink like a human?" "Yes, in fact, as David's holy light grew stronger, he could sustain himself solely with holy light, especially in Cybertronian mode. However, he preferred to maintain his original habits. After all, he wasn't a true silicon-based lifeform. Besides, even true Cybertronians needed energy. So, robots need to eat too. Of course they do. We eat to replenish our energy." David saw Epps's odd expression and knew he was probably complaining about something. He added, "Some mechanical life forms can even replenish their energy through plants, minerals, and other substances. Compared to that, my life is nothing. Plants and minerals, yes, you can think of it as eating wood and stone. There's a mechanical life form with such a strong appetite? What's his, or her name? Icarus. Is this Icarus on Earth? No, he's probably busy with his work in some galaxy." David made up stories to answer Epps' questions. After locating his own room, he followed Epps on a tour of the entire nest base. During the tour, David scanned some weapons, upgrading his internal weapons database. Now, in addition to his standard machine guns, cannons, and grenade launchers, he could transform into various missile launchers and the even more powerful 25mm miniature cannon. When David returned from his round, Major Lennox, who had previously reported to the general, reappeared. "We take the information you shared earlier very seriously. Could you provide us with more information? Also, you mentioned that hidden warriors have come to Earth. Do you know the purpose?" Of course, David wasn't afraid of Lennox or the Earth military questioning him about these matters. He was more worried they wouldn't ask anything. His original plan was to let the plot unfold, wait for the right opportunity, and then take everything he needed. But after carefully reflecting on the plot, he realized that instead of waiting for it to unfold, he would be better off taking the initiative. There wasn't much of a plot to speak of anyway. The entire second Transformers movie was essentially a war over the development of a stellar energy collector. This machine, which harvests energy by destroying stars, was built long ago by several Cybertronian leaders. These 7 ancient Cybertronian leaders were known as the Primes. They searched the universe for suitable stars to harvest energy from, and they had one principle: they could not destroy planets with life. But one of the 7 Supremas wanted to break this rule. This Supreme was the Fallen. A civil war erupted among the Supremas, and the Fallen were defeated. The remaining Supremas had the activation key for the Stellar Energy Collector, also known as the Leader Module. So, what does this have to do with us? Listening to David suddenly recount a story of ancient Cybertronian history, Epps wondered how this incident connected to the Decepticon Hermit Warrior's arrival on Earth. Lennox had some guesses, but he desperately hoped he was wrong. "This inactivated Stellar Energy Collector is on Earth." Lennox had a look of constipation on his face. "I knew it would happen," and Epps beside him was in a similar state. "Cybertron is in dire straits right now. Both the Autobots and the Decepticons are facing an existential crisis. In this situation, if the Decepticons knew there was a device like this on Earth that could provide them with a massive amount of energy, what would they do? I don't need to explain what they would do, right?" As an excellent American major, Lennox understood the implications. His unit had been deployed frequently for energy. Furthermore, he finally understood why Decepticons had been spotted across the globe for the past 2 years. The information brought by the Cybertronian, codenamed Arsenal, perfectly answered their biggest question. "Thank you very much for the information, Major," David called out to Major Lennox, who was about to report to General Morshower again. "Are you going to report this to your superiors?" "Yes, any questions?" Of course, David pointed upwards. Everyone looked up, puzzled, but all they saw was the ceiling. The next moment, they realized they had misunderstood David. Decepticon members are equipped with all sorts of military-related equipment, and Cybertron's technology is countless years ahead of Earth. "Do you think it's safe enough to transmit this kind of important information via signal?" Lennox understood David's point. In previous battles with the Decepticons, while the Decepticons had demonstrated considerable combat effectiveness, they hadn't demonstrated disadvantage. This had led Lennox and the entire Hive force to habitually ignore this aspect of the situation. If possible, it would be best to conduct a briefing face-to-face in a completely secure space, free of electronic devices. Isn't that too much of a stretch? This time, it wasn't David who answered Lennox, but Optimus Prime, who had been battling the Decepticons for countless years. No, if the Decepticons' goal is the stellar energy collector, and if such a device is indeed on Earth, then the Decepticons' elite should have already arrived. Others aside, if their old rival Soundwave arrived, Earth's continued use of technological means for communication would likely be intercepted. Why hadn't Optimus Prime previously mentioned the Decepticons' technological advantage? It was because he didn't know the Decepticons' purpose, and many of the Decepticons eliminated recently were insignificant mass-produced units. These circumstances had led the Autobots to believe that only a small number of Decepticons were active on Earth, never expecting the entire Decepticon force to have arrived. Now that he knew their true purpose, Optimus Prime realized that the Decepticons on Earth were likely far more numerous than he had previously estimated, and their strength far surpassed that of those mass-produced units. After learning that Major Lennox had important information to report to him face-to-face, and subtly warning him of the precarious communications situation, General Morshower, the Hive's commander, authorized the troops to return to North America for rest and recuperation. Thus, David also caught a ride to North America. Because of the crucial information he provided, Lennox and Epps considered David, a Cybertronian newly arrived on Earth, a new comrade. Epps even pointed to several parked cars and joked with David. "You're not an Autobot, so can you transform into a car? I have a car-shaped transformation module." "Oh," Epps piqued his interest at the mention of this. "Do you need us to provide you with a car? Autobots don't just scan a module and then assume a fixed appearance. During Hive missions, they frequently change to suit their appearance. These vehicles, serving as templates, were all provided by the Hive." "That sounds like a good idea. What are the options?" David had already considered scanning cars to obtain vehicle forms, and since someone was offering free templates, he naturally wouldn't refuse. Seeing David's interest, Epps immediately signaled for a moment, then quickly retrieved a car magazine. "There are a lot of beautiful cars here. Would you like me to offer some recommendations?" David took the magazine and flipped through it, noting that it was mostly sports cars, made in the last 2 years. With Epps's occasional educational explanations, David, the alien, quickly gained a relatively rough understanding of the various models. After flipping through the pages for a while, David spotted a familiar model. "This one looks good, the new 2008 Ford Mustang Shelby GT 500 KR. Epps glanced at the magazine in David's hand and read out the model. "How is it? Can I get one?" "That's not difficult. This was a domestic sports car, relatively easy to acquire, whereas some top-tier European brands were much more difficult." "Do you like this style?" What Epps didn't know was that David had chosen this model entirely because of his past influence. If the fit was right and the car could be successfully transformed, he would add 2 red decorative lights to the front of his car. Chapter 165 Waiting for the spoils to come to you. The military transport plane landed smoothly at the North American military base, and David soon met General Morshower. Introduced by Major Lennox, David had a brief conversation with the Nest's Supreme Commander. David shared all the intelligence he knew with the general, including the arrival of elite Decepticons on Earth, the presence of numerous Decepticons with special abilities, including the Hermit Warriors, and the Decepticons' primary goal, to locate the stellar energy collector. "So, if the Decepticons find that device and activate it, our sun will be destroyed." "Exactly." Morshower paused in thought for a moment, realizing the magnitude of the crisis they faced. "Our current communications technology is immune to Decepticon surveillance. Cybertron's technology is far more advanced than Earth's." General Morshower began to feel a headache as he listened to David's words. After a few more questions, he said a friendly farewell to David. General Morshower had great trust in his Autobot allies, and David was treated well. He had no doubts about the intelligence David provided and was planning his next battle plan based on it. David, having finished his conversation with General Morshower, soon received a gift. "This is the Mustang you chose. What do you think of it when you actually see it?" Epps pointed to the black Ford Mustang next to him, looking at David expectantly. He was curious about how David, who looked about the same size as a human, could transform into a car. David looked at the black muscle car in front of him and immediately scanned it, instantly recording every bit of its data. As for the transformation, David found that its compatibility with the car, while higher than the Hummer rescue vehicle he had obtained from scanning the ambulance, was still a bit low. "What's wrong?" Seeing David's eyes flashing and scanning the black Mustang, he froze in his tracks. Epps and Lennox thought something had happened. Was there something wrong with the car? No, nothing. While the car wasn't a perfect match, there was a relatively simple solution. "Let me ask, is this car mine now, this car?" If you really need it, Epps and Lennox didn't understand what David meant. Normally, an Autobot simply scanned a car and it would transform into the scanned one. They watched, bewildered, as David took the driver's seat of a black Mustang. Then, a golden light flashed, and a flash of electricity seemed to pulsate across the surface of the black Mustang. Before they could comprehend what was happening, the black Mustang emitted the transformation sound they'd heard countless times over the past 2 years, transforming into a black giant about 7 meters tall. Wow, while it wasn't the same as their previous impression, it was still a familiar formula, a familiar smell. "You look more like an Autobot now." David's appearance remained the same as his previous mechanical form, the Black Knight Optimus Prime. As for why he needed the entire Mustang to transform, it ultimately came down to the poor fit. Under normal circumstances, if the degree of compatibility is low, while forced transformation is possible, it will have some negative consequences, such as inability to achieve optimal performance. Transforming into a sports car might end up running like an ox cart. However, David discovered a unique solution, transforming the entire car into part of himself, thus eliminating the compatibility issue. This wouldn't be possible under normal circumstances, but the situation on Earth in the Transformers world is unique. In this world, all Earth technology stems from the study of Megatron. This means Earth technology is essentially Cybertronian technology, albeit at a relatively low level. This is a key reason why the Allspark's energy can transform Earth's technology into Transformers. In other words, Earth's technology in this world is nothing more than a bunch of low-end parts kits for Cybertronians. The Decepticons and Autobots despise these low-end parts, but David doesn't care. He simply wants a transformed form, so even if the structural strength is relatively low, he's fine with it. Over time, these newly absorbed accessories would be gradually strengthened by the holy light within David. In the future, he could use alchemy to further enhance them, so he didn't mind their low-end qualities. However, this created a certain disconnect between David's main body and these newly created accessories, separating them during transformation. David had unwittingly become a leader warrior. His main body became the head, the Mustang the other parts, combining into a complete transformer. A leader warrior, so to speak. David saw no difference. His primary purpose in coming to this world had been achieved. The only thing that surprised him was when he had acquired the ability to activate these technological gadgets into Transformers. Was it some kind of benign mutation caused by the fusion of holy light in Cybertron's body? He was certain that he hadn't gained any special privileges in this world, as he had in Azeroth. And if he had, he wouldn't have activated a defective body like this one. As doubts arose, David suddenly became curious about the Allspark. If he scanned the Allspark, perhaps he could use it to upgrade this unique activation ability? What are your plans next? Watching David transform from a huge metal giant into a black Mustang muscle car, although he didn't know why there were decorative lights on the front of the car that kept sweeping back and forth, Lennox decided to ignore the question. Who doesn't have a little personal aesthetic? You should formulate a plan to deal with the Decepticons next, right? Yes, although we haven't received clear orders yet, the Decepticons are about to destroy Earth. Is it still possible to negotiate amicably? It will definitely be a fight to the death. David's mind began to work rapidly. Rather than exhausting himself by traversing the world to collect what he needed, he preferred to rely on the help of local forces to deliver various things to him. This was not difficult. He only needed to speak and provide some intelligence, so he really couldn't think of a reason to abandon the simple plan and go out alone to roam the world. My personal suggestion. Although I don't know how many Decepticons have come to Earth so far, or whether they are monitoring your communications, David glanced at Lennox, the major in front of him who is quietly listening to David's words, but anything involving Megatron will definitely attract the attention of the Decepticons. Megatron, Lennox didn't expect David to mention the Decepticon leader. But wasn't he dead? He's now abandoned at the bottom of the sea. Megatron has a high prestige among the Decepticons, and his powerful fighting ability is indispensable to the Decepticons, especially when dealing with the Autobots. David once again emphasized the importance of Megatron, and by the way, He complained about the official way Earth dealt with Megatron, so, the Decepticons will definitely find ways to resurrect Megatron. As for hiding Megatron's body on the bottom of the sea, this is really not a good choice, placing Megatron in a place where you can't defend well, but the other party can come and go at will. David admired these people's brain circuits. Do they think that the oceans of the Earth can stop a group of high-level civilized life forms that can move between galaxies? Lennox, who was complained by David, also began to feel that this arrangement was a bit stupid. He decided to present these words to the experts and consultants intact later. At the same time, he sorted out David's suggestions in his heart and thought about its feasibility. So, since we don't know where the Decepticons are hiding, you think we might as well use Megatron to lure them all out, and then fight an ambush. In this way, the decisive battle can be fought on the battlefield of your choice, and you can make adequate preparations in advance. David's words make sense. If sufficient preparations are made and there are sufficient weapons and ammunition, Lennox feels that the Decepticons can be completely eliminated. But if the Decepticons really resurrect Megatron, then the initiative of starting a war will no longer be on their side, and even the choice of battlefield will be dominated by the other side. I will report your suggestions to General Moshauer in detail. Next, David just had to wait quietly. General Moshauer was quite reliable, and he should understand that David's suggestion was the best plan for now. Following David's suggestion, using Megatron's body and the Allspark fragment as bait, even if the Decepticons knew it was a conspiracy, they would have no other choice but to launch an attack to retrieve Megatron's body and resurrect him with the Allspark fragment. All David had to do was wait patiently for the Decepticons to arrive. Before that, perhaps he could even get a glimpse of the Allspark fragment. He only needed to scan it to determine if it could upgrade his Cybertronian body. If he truly needed the fragment, he could always go to the protagonist, Sam Witwicky, who happened to have a fragment of the Allspark. Either Sam has it or Michaela has it. Putting the Allspark aside, David began to ponder, if the Decepticons were truly annihilated in this battle, what benefits would he gain? Starscream's flight module and Cybertronian body, an ugly version of Hercules made up of mass-produced Decepticons? Oh, and Soundwave's robot dog is pretty good. As a hunter, I just need a pet. Chapter 166 Where is the Autobots' future? If the Decepticons knew someone had already claimed some of their members as trophies before they'd even engaged them in combat, what would they think? Especially when this person was someone they didn't even know. Of course, even if they knew, it would be meaningless. As long as their goal was the stellar energy collector, they had to attack Earth. Furthermore, to obtain the key to the stellar energy collector, the leadership module, they had to continuously gather clues on Earth to find it. And Megatron was indispensable to defeating the Autobots who would try to stop them. Therefore, David's suggestion to General Moshauer seemed more like an overt conspiracy. So what if you knew there was a trap? Why wouldn't you come? Moreover, given the Decepticons' arrogant nature, they might have believed that if they were determined to launch a frontal attack, the weaker creatures on Earth would be powerless to stop them. The actual situation was much as David had suspected. After some discussion and planning, Earth conducted a test and confirmed that their communications were indeed being monitored by the Decepticons. Then, given the Decepticons' recent increased activity on Earth, they decided to completely destroy Megatron's body. Another information leaked. The Nest troops, the main force in the fight against the Decepticons, were deployed to the predetermined battlefield, Egypt. Why Egypt? Because some people wouldn't accept a battlefield in their own home. Egypt is so wonderful. With its vast desert, bombings can have no impact, allowing both the Decepticons and the combined forces of Earth and Autobots to unleash unbridled destruction. Before the actual battle, David's only task was to continuously scan various weapons and equipment, recording their data. If David had simply given himself the codename Arsenal before arriving in this world, he was now a veritable arsenal. Perhaps he truly had a natural talent for this, but David discovered that he could easily record and transform any scanned conventional weapon. After some adjustments, David's normal appearance remained similar, except that his back had transformed, and the cannon protruding from his right shoulder had become a 6-barreled Vulcan cannon. On his left was a missile launcher, capable of firing a variety of missiles. The shoulder grenade launchers were removed, sharing a spot with the missile launchers that could be stowed away on his back. David could decide which to use based on the situation. Unfortunately, David didn't get to board the USS Kidd, the destroyer equipped with a railgun, otherwise his arsenal would have been even more extensive. Feeling unsatisfied, David wandered around, hoping to scan more weaponry and equipment, hoping to see if he could scan some aircraft data. Unfortunately, he was stationed with the Autobots and the Hive's only sightings were helicopters and transports, with no fighters to be seen. Scanning helicopters? David wasn't particularly interested in transforming into a helicopter, nor was he interested in copying Airwolf, even if the name had the word wolf in it. If possible, he'd love to scan the F-14 Tomcat, followed by the F-22 Raptor and F-15 Eagle, and then the A-10 attack aircraft and Harrier. This ranking was based on appearance over functionality. After all, no matter which type the scanning transformation took, it was still a transformer, not a replica of a fighter's capabilities. If it weren't for the current lack of prospects, David would have been eager to scan and record data on the VF-25 Messiah, VF-27 Lucifer, and even the YF-29 Durandal. He particularly wanted to make the YF-29 his permanent fighter. After a brief exploration, finding nothing interesting to scan further, David returned to his resting area. His barracks were alongside the Autobots, several of whom were resting in their vehicle configurations. Optimus Prime was discussing something with Lennox, likely about the impending battle. For humanity, if this battle could completely defeat the Decepticons, it would undoubtedly usher in a period of peace, freeing them from the constant fear of their plots. David believed that the absence of the Decepticon threat wouldn't be a good thing for the Autobots. As Lennox left, David noticed Optimus Prime looking at him. You thought of that, too. Optimus Prime might be a bit saintly, a bit overly idealistic, but he was definitely not a fool. Optimus Prime was certainly aware of the hidden dangers David could see. After spending several years on Earth and interacting with various humans, especially numerous human officials, he could fully anticipate what they would do now that the Decepticons were no longer a threat. David, my friend, what do you think we should do? Optimus Prime was a little torn. He knew some humans were capable of wicked deeds, but he also saw their good side. Deep down, he longed to remain on Earth, hoping for a harmonious relationship between Earthlings and Cybertronians. However, he also knew that there were some conflicts between the two sides, and he couldn't think of a clear solution, so he decided to consult David. After all, David was a ruler himself, and he didn't seem to mind Cybertronians settling in his territory. Perhaps David could offer him insights into how to better integrate the Autobots into Earth life? Do you hope Cybertronians can truly integrate with Earth? Yes. David paused for a few seconds before asking, can you guarantee that Cybertronians who decide to settle on Earth will truly consider themselves Earthlings? Optimus Prime opened his mouth to respond, but ultimately stopped himself. He felt he couldn't represent all Autobots, let alone all Cybertronians. Putting aside the vast racial differences, if you don't even consider yourself Earthling, why would Earthlings consider you true compatriots? David raised his hand, stopping Optimus. Don't mention those in the Hive. After long-term contact with you, they might consider you comrades. But most Earthlings haven't had the opportunity to interact with you. They can only form their first impression based on what they see with their own eyes. This first impression can be a lifelong one. There are billions of people on Earth, and the vast majority will never have direct contact with Cybertronians in their entire lives, so naturally, there's no chance to change their first impression. There's a very important reason I'm willing to accept Cybertronians into Wintertown. My territory isn't very large. Wintertown currently has fewer than 500 people, and with such a small area, it's easy to get to know everyone by strolling around every day. Unique life forms like Cybertronians quickly become familiar to everyone in town. After spending time together and understanding Cybertronian personalities, they naturally become less resistant. Furthermore, Wintertown's residents are primarily Azerothians, a world known for its wide-ranging culture. They're not particularly averse to Cybertronians. As for the natives of Brunia, since their population has been growing slowly, they've been influenced by Wintertown's original inhabitants and aren't overly concerned with these issues. Especially since the arrival of Cybertronians could improve the lives of Wintertown's residents. As David mentioned this, Optimus Prime seemed to reflect on something. You've realized that, haven't you? Yes, after arriving on Earth, the Autobots haven't brought any benefits to Earth's people, nor have they had any positive impact on Earth's development or human life. All anyone sees is that with the Autobots' arrival, the Decepticons appear too, and then there's a raging war, with Earth becoming a Cybertronian battlefield. Anyone would be resentful of this situation, right? The Decepticon threat remains, which is why Earth officials allow the Autobots to remain. Once the Decepticons are gone, what use will the Autobots have? Logically, as a more advanced civilization, Cybertronians would be delighted to offer assistance in technological poverty alleviation, worshipping them like ancestors, at least until they've completely ripped them out of their technology. However, Optimus Prime feels that Earth's people are too belligerent and unwilling to share their technology. David railed furiously, his metallic face flushing red, but he showed no sign of stopping. Finally, the good-hearted Ratchet came to the rescue, saving the Autobot leader. David, perhaps you're right, but Optimus Prime's concerns aren't unfounded. What if we hand over Cybertron's technology to humans and Earth becomes the next Cybertron? They felt that Earth, such a wonderful planet, shouldn't be destroyed like Cybertron. What about Earth going to be destroyed? David's eyes released holographic images, projecting Earth. This is Earth a few decades ago. This is Earth today. Based on Earth's current development, Earth will look like this in the future. The 3 Earth projections were visibly different. The first was vibrant and bright, the second was grayish, the third was a drab yellow. Technology isn't right or wrong, the key is how it's applied. Cybertron has a more advanced civilization, and you know the mistakes you've made. Don't you know how to avoid them and try to help Earth forge a new path? But what if we hand over Cybertron's technology to humans and they refuse to follow our advice? David suddenly understood why Optimus Prime was reluctant to hand over Cybertron's technology. It seemed the Autobot leader wanted to give all of it to Earthlings at once. Brother, are you so honest? I'm asking you to use technology to alleviate poverty, not to drain your family's wealth, squeeze dry. Chapter 167, Start Harvesting the Spoils. David suggested to Optimus Prime that technology be provided incrementally. It didn't need to be cutting edge, just superior to what Earth currently possessed. Technological advancements must be approached step by step. In reality, even if Optimus Prime handed Cybertron's technology to humanity all at once, it would be meaningless. Megatron, a massive mega-telescope, had been sitting there for decades, and the end result was still barely rudimentary. Given this situation, humanity wouldn't be able to absorb more advanced technology immediately. It would still require incremental improvement. Therefore, there wouldn't be much difference between Optimus Prime providing technology gradually and giving it all at once. The biggest impact would be whether the Autobots were still useful or no longer. David also suggested to Optimus Prime, have Earth's humanity quickly establish a unified government, arguing that a tiny planet with so many factions and scattered resources simply didn't have the necessary infrastructure for civilizational advancement. This rhetoric, combined with some relatively advanced space mining or deep-sea mining technology, would be enough to keep Earth's population in turmoil for a long time, and by then, they would naturally stop targeting the Autobots. Besides, the Autobots were already willing to provide technology, establishing a basis for continued cooperation, albeit with conditions. Isn't that a bad idea? Optimus Prime felt this suggestion could easily provoke war on Earth, but David countered with a practical rebuttal. Even if you didn't propose it, the fight for resources has never stopped. When has war ever stopped on Earth? If Optimus Prime truly wanted to help Earth, he would have been better off establishing a unified government on Earth and providing space exploration and development technology, allowing Earthlings to focus on the boundless resources of the universe. Furthermore, space exploration would create more jobs and drive the development of a whole range of industries. Technological advancements could also lead to better medical equipment and cures for more diseases. In theory, this could truly help humanity. Of course, even the best plans are bound to encounter complications during implementation, and there's no telling how many nasty things might ensue. David couldn't control that. Optimus Prime couldn't possibly control everything either. He'd already provided technology that would improve Earthlings' lives. If Earthlings didn't utilize it properly, it wasn't his fault, was it? If you're worried about someone using this technology for evil, you could propose the formation of a supervisory body, with Earth officials and the Autobots jointly responsible. If Optimus Prime rejected any of these suggestions, David offered 2 alternatives: go to Wintertown, or go somewhere outside of North America. After presenting all his suggestions, David stopped talking about the matter. It wasn't that he couldn't think of other suggestions, but he knew they wouldn't be adopted by Optimus Prime. Some of them would be pointless. Even Optimus Prime's current proposal of establishing a unified Earth government wasn't necessarily something the Autobot leader would actually implement. Seeing David wouldn't continue, Optimus Prime sincerely thanked David and then discussed the matter with his fellow Autobots. Should they follow David's suggestion and allow Earth to establish a unified government? Should the Autobots help Earth develop technology and enter the space age? If so, how could they ensure Earth wouldn't stray from the right path? Finally, if they truly did leave, would they remain on Earth but move to a different region? Or would they simply leave Earth altogether? These matters couldn't be resolved without considerable discussion. Moreover, the Autobots on Earth were only a small fraction, with many more scattered across the universe. Perhaps a wider range of opinions should be sought before making a decision? As the Autobots continued to hold small meetings, David occasionally strolled through the camp, and the Hive troops rested and waited. The Decepticons finally appeared. Megatron was a perfect bait, and coupled with the information from the Allspark fragment, the Decepticons had no suspicion that this was a trap. Of course, as David suspected, the Decepticons knew and didn't care. Standing at an observation post some distance from the ambush, David and Lennox gazed at the ambush ring, where the rumble of explosions echoed in the distance. Countless Decepticons dropped from the sky, transforming into various military vehicles, weapons, and massive metal giants. Braving the barrage of human artillery and missiles, they advanced towards their target, the special facility they believed was being used to destroy Megatron's body. To create a deceptive effect, the Hive troops deployed a massive defensive firepower system around the fake facility, with the Autobots present in full force. Seeing this, the Decepticons would undoubtedly be more convinced of the intelligence's accuracy, and they would launch a frantic, relentless assault on the target facility. Although the sudden, intensifying reinforcements arrived at a somewhat rapid pace, the Decepticons remained unfazed, their attack relentlessly continuing, even to the point where two Hercules appeared on the scene. The Hercules in the film universe is composed of a stack, 10, judging by the setting, of mass-produced units, allowing the Decepticons to deploy multiple Hercules simultaneously if they chose. The presence of two Hercules intensified the battle, and the Hercules' massive bulk served as a perfect shield for the Decepticons, enabling them to advance faster and break through the Earthling and Autobot defenses. Retreat to the next line of defense. Lennox, from his observation post, observed the evolving situation and issued timely orders. David, also at the observation post, stayed out of the front lines of the action. He'd never been one for the frenzy of battle. Tired of watching from the sidelines? Or perhaps he found sand and gunpowder more appealing? He wanted to watch the action quietly, but the Decepticons wouldn't give him that opportunity. Turning to see a soldier enter the post and then walk resolutely toward William Lennox, David immediately noticed something was wrong with the soldier. "Look out!" As he shouted, David had already transitioned from human to machine form. He extended his right hand and unleashed a burst of golden energy, striking the soldier accurately, sending him flying and slamming him against the wall. What happened? David's movements were so swift that by the time anyone at the observation post realized what was happening, he had already blasted a soldier away. The Nest troopers presented and aimed their guns at David, but instead drew their weapons and attacked the soldier who had been sent flying. After 2 years of fighting alongside the Autobots, these soldiers had built a deep trust with him. So when David attacked, their first reaction was that an enemy had infiltrated, not that David was the enemy. Lennox reacted the same way, standing firmly beside David and aiming his weapon at the soldier who seemed to be slumped against the wall. Hidden warrior, yes, fire. Confirming his suspicions with David, Lennox ordered a concentrated firepower attack, rendering the man useless. The soldiers, receiving the order, immediately began firing. The Decepticon, who had intended to feign death and incite internal conflict, was forced to transform back into his mechanical form, weapons drawn, and prepare to retaliate. Unfortunately, he wasn't quick enough. By the time he revealed his Decepticon form, David had already unleashed his 6-barreled Vulcan cannon. Powered by the Holy Spark, the Vulcan cannon possessed terrifying destructive power. With a mere buzz, the Decepticon was rendered useless. Several soldiers fired a few more shots, lashing the Decepticon hermit's corpse. Then, they cautiously scanned their surroundings, trying to see if there were any unfamiliar strangers among their comrades. David once again scanned the crowd, employing every possible means of detection, including holy light, to ensure no more hermits had infiltrated the area. Moved to Observation Post 2, the Decepticons' presence meant the location had been compromised. As commander, Lennox had to relocate, or else the next attack wouldn't be an assassination attempt, but a potential Decepticon barrage. As David left, he glanced at the Decepticon hermit's corpse. Convinced he couldn't fit it into the storage compartment, He silently marked the coordinates of the location. If he had time, he would take the corpse to Winter Town. Next time I go out on a mission, I should bring a few more storage items, even though each only held 1 cubic meter of space. Bringing several would still hold a considerable amount. He had only brought one this time. It was a huge mistake. Even if he brought one more, the hermit warrior's size meant he could easily pack it up and carry it away, without worrying about the US troops snatching it up first. After leaving observation post 1 and while relocating, Major Lennox was attacked again by Decepticons, this time by Soundwave's robot dog and Laserbeak. Aha! They've arrived. David, upon seeing the 2 Decepticons, instantly became excited. Any thoughts of not embracing the battlefield faded from Laniakia. The 6-barreled Vulcan cannon protruding from his right shoulder blasted the robot dog furiously, the hum sound finally becoming more than just a fleeting blast. Simultaneously, he transformed into a missile launcher, locked onto Laserbeak in the air, and unleashed 4 missiles in quick succession. Despite Laserbeak's exceptional maneuverability, it couldn't evade David's attacks. David raised his arms, revealing machine guns, and continuously strafed Laserbeak. Under this saturation firepower, Laserbeak was quickly severely damaged and stumbled away. David didn't chase it, as he couldn't fly. Instead, he unleashed all his remaining firepower on the robot dog, quickly reducing it to a dead machine. Looking at the unidentifiable pile of scrap metal beneath his feet, David simply stored the robot dog's corpse in his storage space. Pet acquired. Chapter 168. Thank you Zaya Hong for the plane. With Robo-Dog in hand, David began to anticipate more Decepticons. He didn't have to wait long. After Laserbeak and Robo-Dog failed, Starscream was dispatched to eliminate the commander of the combined human Autobot force. Soundwave hoped to eliminate the human commander, thereby throwing the humans and Autobots into chaos and facilitating the Decepticon attack. From a strategic perspective, there was no problem. He also considered the possibility of Autobots on the commander's side, so his first choice was to dispatch a hermit for a close-range assassination. However, to Soundwave's surprise, the Autobots also had a hermit, who foiled his plan. Furthermore, this hermit proved incredibly powerful, severely wounding Laserbeak and killing Robo-Dog in direct combat. With Soundwave's attention, the Decepticons dispatched Starscream to execute a decapitation tactic against Lennox, simultaneously aiming to eliminate the threatening Autobot hermit. Are you the Autobot hermit warrior? Starscream bombarded the area with missiles, but failed to hide a single soldier. Deciding it was a waste of ammunition and spark energy, he transformed into human form and landed in front of David, Lennox, and the others. Strange hermit warrior, you should have remained in hiding, as you did before, instead of joining the Autobots and fighting the Decepticons. David was a complete stranger, and Starscream suspected he might be a survivor of the Cybertron War who hadn't joined a faction, instead finding a secluded hiding place. He didn't know why he'd suddenly joined the Autobots. David had no interest in explaining his origins. As Starscream appeared, a launch port opened on his shoulder, the spot where the grenade launcher had once been, but which David had since removed. Then, a miniature Mustang sports car, contained by Cybertron's compression technology, which supposedly only compresses objects related to itself, ejected. It gradually grew and transformed in mid-air, completing its transformation from sports car to humanoid form by the time it landed. David, his head fused to his torso, leaped towards Starscream. He had no acquaintance with Starscream and had never met him before, so there was no need to waste time reminiscing. He was more interested in obtaining Starscream's flight module. The other party had already presented themselves to him. If he didn't accept the gift package quickly, it would be a shame to the Decepticons' hospitality. Starscream had never encountered an Autobot like this before. In the past, it was standard practice for any Autobot to exchange barbs and taunts upon meeting. This newcomer didn't seem to understand the rules. Boom. Bang. Clang. Starscream was stunned for a moment before David delivered a barrage of Cybertronian punches. To compensate for his relatively weak form compared to true Cybertronian, David unleashed Holy Light at full power, shielding his entire body in a shield of holy light. At the same time, each of his attacks was imbued with a powerful holy energy, and whenever his fists collided with Starscream, they erupted in a brilliant golden glow. In his excitement, David's fists were once again coated in holy fire, unleashing a series of powerful combos upon Starscream. These flames were certainly far less effective against Cybertronians than they were against flesh and blood creatures and undead creatures, but the visual and auditory effects of these attacks were breathtaking and incredibly impressive. The soldiers nearby were stunned, completely oblivious to the fact that they were actually on the battlefield, simply standing there watching their new Autobot comrade pummel Starscream with fists shrouded in golden flames. Coconut. That's it. Kill this Decepticon, Epps, forgetting that he was supposed to protect Lennox as he moved to another observation post so he could continue directing the battle on the main battlefield. Instead, he stood by, shouting encouragement to David, "Kick him! Kick him! Kick! Well done! We'll eliminate a lot of Decepticons." Seeing David execute a critical hit according to his voice commands, Epps was so delighted that he felt as if he were the one beating up Starscream himself. "Don't give this bastard a chance. Pin that bastard." David gave Starscream no chance. To prevent the flight module and hardware he was about to acquire from escaping, David even resorted to a grappling attack, taking advantage of Starscream's momentary daze and pinning him to the ground. Placing his entire weight on Starscream, David's hands shone with an even brighter light, his forearms practically transforming into balls of golden light, even the flames swirling around them obscured. "Wait, maybe we..." Starscream was barely halfway through his words when David's fist came crashing down, slamming into his face. A continuous barrage of blows followed, his fists transforming into machine guns, unleashing a continuous clang 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 clang, bang 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 sound. Realizing the dire situation, Starscream immediately attempted to take flight. His thrusters had barely activated, and before he'd even lifted off the ground, he suddenly saw a six-barreled machine gun appear before him. The black muzzle instantly spewed out more a blazing stream of flame, engulfing Starscream's face. Then, a sharp pain shot through his body, and Starscream lost consciousness. Starscream, pierced through by his own punch, his fire shattered, and completely devoid of life, David stood back up. He then performed a meticulous scan of Starscream's body, revealing the hardware and modules needed to transform into an aircraft and military vehicle. Another planned goal, achieved. David's mood was bright with joy as things were progressing so smoothly. After returning to normal size and compressing the Mustang into his body, David looked at Starscream's body, intact except for the damage to his head and chest. He finally extended his sinful hand. As David's right hand, radiating holy light, touched Starscream's corpse, a flash of light and electricity washed over it. Starscream's body once again transformed into the form of an F-22 Raptor. However, when it returned to human form, it was no longer the ugly form it had been in before. David, Lennox and Epps, who had been cheering at the destruction of another Decepticon, were surprised to see that after David's hand touched Starscream, the Decepticon transformed back into an airplane. Before they could understand what was happening, the Decepticon suddenly transformed. Had it not taken on the familiar form of David, they would have likely opened fire. "It's me, don't worry," David stretched himself. Compared to the bodies transformed from ordinary Mustang sports cars on Earth, Starscream's body was a genuine Cybertronian. Its strength and powerful capabilities were incomparable to that defective one. Having acquired Starscream's body, David could now be called a true Cybertronian. "I simply used this guy's body to upgrade myself. Can Cybertronians even upgrade like this?" Yes, David was about to say that he must be a special case. But then he remembered that in the original Transformers 2, Jetfire had contributed his spark and body to help the resurrected Optimus Prime complete his upgrade. The upgraded Jetfire Optimus Prime then brutally defeated Fallen Megatron and Megatron, significantly boosting his combat power. Although David didn't possess Starscream's spark, his own spark was powerful enough to fully utilize the combat capabilities of this body. Due to the unique power David possessed, he could even unleash a greater combat power than an ordinary Cybertronian. "So, now you can transform into both a Mustang and a Raptor." Epps looked at David before him, finally realizing the difference between David and the other Autobots. This Cybertronian, David, was far superior to the average Autobot. "That's right, the battle over there seems to be a stalemate. I'm going to go help." "You're right, the fight isn't over yet." David's reminder reminded them that now wasn't the right time to chat. The Autobots and numerous soldiers were still battling the Decepticons. In fact, the battle had already reached a critical juncture, with the Decepticons themselves engaged. Optimus Prime, lacking the Skyfire upgrade, could only barely contain the Decepticon, preventing him from attacking the other Autobots and human soldiers. Just as Optimus Prime marveled at the Decepticon's astonishing strength and felt a sense of overwhelm, a golden light enveloped him, and he felt his weakened fire regain its intensity. Before he could comprehend what was happening, a familiar raptor with Decepticon livery came hurtling towards him, then flew past him, transforming mid-air into the form of his new, familiar companion, David. Boom! All the power he gained from the long-distance flight acceleration after transforming into human form was channeled through his legs into the corrupted Titan, sending the creature, who had lived for who knows how long and thought it was Starscream coming to support him, flying away, sending him skipping across the sandy ocean. David, it was me. Seeing Optimus Prime's puzzled expression, David briefly explained, I killed Starscream and leveled myself up. I see, it was Starscream's body. No wonder David had the Decepticon icon on him. But you'd better change the Decepticon icon, or you'll be easily injured. I changed the livery at the same time I kicked that guy away. I can't do anything anymore. Starting to update normally. Guys, it's been ages since I've updated like this. Give me some praise. Chapter 169 David picking up corpses on the battlefield. Fallen Kong looked across at David. He found a black Cybertronian unfamiliar, yet his spark was incredibly powerful, so powerful that he suspected he was also a Prime. There are two Primes on Earth. Optimus Prime was Prime's descendant, and only Prime could defeat him, a fellow Prime. This was a key reason why the weakened Fallen Kong hadn't come to Earth while Optimus Prime was alive. In the original film, the Decepticons had managed to resurrect Megatron, and only after Megatron had killed Optimus Prime did Fallen Kong boldly come to Earth to cause trouble. Now, the situation was somewhat unusual. Despite the Decepticon attack's impressive momentum and seemingly smooth progress, they hadn't been able to recover Megatron's body, let alone resurrect the powerful Decepticon leader. In desperation, Fallen Kong personally intervened, but he had no idea what awaited him. David had no idea what the fallen cyborg before him was thinking. Hearing the question, he didn't respond. Instead, he turned to Optimus Prime beside him and asked, "How are you feeling?" "I've never felt better." Optimus Prime felt the fire within him. He hadn't felt this good in ages. These Cybertronian refugees hadn't had a full meal in ages, and their bodies had been weak. At the beginning of the first film, Vertigo was able to use his shield to withstand the barrage of bombs from an entire US military base, destroying it. That barely demonstrated some of the Cybertronians' combat power. Back then, Vertigo could still use an energy shield, but later, neither the Decepticons nor the Autobots had the energy to create a strong enough shield. It wasn't that they didn't have one, it was just very fragile. On Earth, the Cybertronian forces relied heavily on their bodies to withstand the incoming fire. When their bodies were damaged, they needed the fire to heal. This already weak fire consumed even more energy to repair itself, leaving them with less energy to activate a powerful defense, which in turn caused them to suffer further damage. The Autobots and Decepticons were thus trapped in a vicious cycle. But after being healed today by the energy known as Holy Light released by David, he felt his spark had returned to a remarkably good state, at least to 70% to 80% of its peak combat power. He released an invisible energy shield and drew his Melta-Sword and Melta-Axe from his back, the yellow glow emanating from them seeming to grow even more intense and conspicuous. Even before they engaged in actual combat, Optimus Prime could sense the dangerous aura emanating from him. What's going on? Why has Optimus Prime suddenly become so powerful? He glanced at the strange Prime who had just appeared, believing him to be responsible for all this. But before he could observe for a moment, the strange Prime who had impersonated Starscream and attacked him had already charged forward. The machine guns, cannons, on his arms lashed out with ammunition, while the missile launchers on his shoulders fired off several missiles in succession. Although these missiles didn't directly hit Optimus Prime, they sent smoke and dust billowing all around him. Combined with the continuous explosions around him, Optimus Prime's perception was severely affected. Just as the Fallen Kong was on guard, a tremendous force erupted from beneath him, sending him flying. He then spotted a dark figure sliding past below. Though he wanted to curse this unfamiliar Supreme for his lack of martial ethics, he didn't have the time for that. Even as he soared into the air, Optimus Prime arrived, his Melta-Axe swinging towards the Fallen Kong's neck. He dodged the blow with all his might, even unleashing a superpower unmatched by ordinary Kongs, only to be engulfed by a massive pillar of fire that appeared out of nowhere. Engulfed by the blazing flames, the Fallen Kong was dazed. He suspected the new Supreme was a Prime, but he hadn't expected such a formidable one. He had never seen a Supreme wield such power, like the radiance of the sun. Furthermore, he was so weak. Could he truly defeat such a foe? Already doubting himself and with his strength severely diminished, the fallen Kong refused to stand still, but he could not escape Optimus Prime's grasp. Even if he managed to find a moment of opportunity, the despicable creature constantly on the side would unleash golden energy to knock him down, forcing him back into a tangle with Optimus Prime. Worse still, even if he tried to kill or severely injure Optimus Prime with all his might, thus securing a chance to retreat, he would find that even the slightest sign of weakness would cause Optimus Prime to shimmer with a golden glow. Then, the Autobot leader would rejuvenate and launch an even more ferocious and powerful attack. The corrupted Titan died, pierced through the heart by Optimus Prime's sword. Finally, corrupted Titan tried to speak again, but after uttering just 2 words, Optimus Prime chopped off his head with an axe, leaving this world with his unspoken words. The two then joined forces to destroy Hercules and engaged in a brutal slaughter on the battlefield. Optimus Prime, his Allspark restored by the holy light to high-powered output, was a complete dimensionality reduction blow against the old, weak, and mass-produced Decepticons. By the end of the battle, David had ceased participating in the fighting, instead meticulously selecting the right excavators on the battlefield. He summoned Ratchet to help him select suitable excavators. Thanks to David's diligent selection and Ratchet's diligent transportation, he had chosen 6 mass-produced Decepticons, which formed part of the 2 uglier versions of Hercules present. Their bodies had been returned to Winterstown, and upon David's return, he would journey to Azeroth and, using his authority there, mobilize the vast holy light to revive the excavators. To be precise, to give them new life. Will it really work? Ratchet understood David's plan perfectly, but he wondered if he could actually pull it off. If successful, wouldn't it mean David would be as important to Cybertron as the Allspark? I don't know, it wouldn't hurt to try. While he and Ratchet were stealthily picking up bodies on the battlefield, Optimus Prime had already completed his final harvest, leaving no Decepticon standing. How was the battle? More focused on his own affairs, David waited until everything was over before asking Ironhide for details. Overall, the Autobot Earth Coalition had achieved a resounding victory. Even the ultimate weapon prepared for the Decepticons hadn't been used. The facility rumored to contain Megatron's body was actually a massive trap. After the Decepticons successfully breached the structure, what awaited them wasn't Megatron, but a dazzling display of fireworks. Regardless, a resounding victory is something to be happy about, although a few Decepticons escaped today's battle. The vast majority were killed in the ambush, especially the numerous mass-produced units, which were completely destroyed in the battle. For the next few days, the Decepticons shouldn't be causing trouble for humanity worldwide. As for those Decepticons who escaped, David had a nagging suspicion that Optimus Prime had deliberately let them escape. After confirming the Decepticons' situation, the Coalition took stock of the casualties. Many human soldiers were killed or wounded, and David had no role in their treatment or post-war compensation. However, David pointed to the bodies of the fallen soldiers being carried away and whispered to Optimus Prime, "The more soldiers die, the worse your image in the eyes of humanity becomes." Optimus Prime watched the soldiers in silence. He understood what David meant. While, in a sense, the Decepticons' attack on Earth had its reasons, and the Autobots couldn't be blamed, most ordinary people couldn't know the details. They only saw humanity inexplicably drawn into the war against Cybertron, at the cost of countless lives. "I've made my decision," David nodded, without questioning Optimus's decision. If Optimus Prime decided to lead the Autobots to Winterfell, he would have told him. If he didn't mention it, it meant he had made another choice, and in that case, his involvement was no longer significant. The two sides could simply maintain their current relationship. Are any Autobots injured? Everyone's hurt, but RC's injuries are serious. The Autobots weren't the primary force in this battle, primarily maneuvering and patrolling, providing support to the humans, helping them evacuate, and other auxiliary tasks. Therefore, while they all looked a bit battered, no one was truly killed. Only RC, due to her size, was vulnerable to damage, and was severely injured after taking several Decepticon rounds. But at least the spark wasn't damaged, so it should heal with time. As long as the spark is alright, this situation is easy to handle. David and Ratchet approached RC. Seeing RC, who was missing many parts and looking a bit battered, David and Ratchet decided to work together to heal the last remaining female Autobot. Just as the ambulance was about to start, David suddenly stopped it. Wait a minute, what's wrong? Something just occurred to me. David stopped the ambulance, looked at RC, who was still feeling relieved, and asked her a question. Before I help you treat you, I want to confirm first. Do you still want to maintain your current three-body state? You mean? RC was a little surprised when she heard David's question. Can you restore me to normal? Yes, David found that he could indeed restore RC to normal. Of course, if you don't want to, you can continue to have three bodies. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 170 Wintertown Air Force. RC's trio of bodies stems from a failed operation before her arrival on Earth. During that operation, RC was captured by the Decepticons and held captive. The Decepticons had no regard for their captives, and they showed no mercy to the Autobots, who had been their enemies for countless years. Thus, RC became a test subject for the Decepticons, who subjected her to various experiments, ultimately leading to her transformation into the RC Sisters. While they were called sisters, Clolia and Alita were merely clones, drawing on RC's memories of her fallen comrades. These two newly formed personalities were incomplete and could not be considered true Cybertronians, resulting in the peculiar arrangement of three bodies, each still primarily RC, sharing a single mind. Having three bodies may seem more flexible, but it often comes at a disadvantage, RC said. She was once considered an experienced and capable Autobot warrior. However, after becoming the three RC sisters, their strength was weakened. Their bodies were split into three, and their spark was divided into three parts, making each RC body weaker. This has left the RC sisters in a very awkward position within the Autobot team. They are currently tasked with maintaining relations with David in Wintertown, and serving as the Autobots' permanent representatives there, largely due to this. I hope to return to my original form. RC was fully aware of her situation, and after a moment's hesitation, she made her decision. This might completely destroy her sisters, but she understood that the two sisters, created from her memories, were not the comrades she had fought alongside for years. Furthermore, even if they were restored to their original forms, their memories would not disappear, they would simply return to their original state. In that case, it would be best to obtain some Cybertron parts. This will help you regain your original strength. With RC's treatment plan finalized, everyone calmed down. While Earth soldiers and Autobots worked together to clean up the battlefield, Ratchet searched for suitable parts. During this time, David used Holy Light to heal the Autobots. After being healed by the Holy Light, many of the Autobot sparks returned to normal to varying degrees. The abundant spark energy also healed the Autobots' injuries at a visible rate. When Ratchet returned, he found his comrades looking like brand new. I heard you're learning this power called Holy Light. Ironhide, upon seeing Ratchet return, immediately greeted the Autobot medic. Come on, learn it quickly. Ratchet, completely confused as to what was going on, looked puzzled. Turning to see David, he finally understood the reason for their reaction. Even if I learn how to use this energy, it's hard to reach David's level. Even if the results are less impressive, it's still a very powerful ability. Optimus Prime encouraged his team's medic. Ever since David's help had significantly restored the spark's energy, Optimus Prime had been eager to learn and master this power called Holy Light. If they could learn it, wouldn't it mean the Autobots would no longer have to worry about hunger? Furthermore, with their full strength restored, the Autobots wouldn't have to worry too much about human threats. Once their strength was restored and they could use their energy shields properly, most Earth weapons wouldn't even scratch the paint. This way, Optimus Prime and his team could better guide humanity's technological advancements and avoid the mistakes Cybertron had made. The Autobots' future seemed brighter, and Optimus Prime, who had been unsure of which direction to lead the Autobots, suddenly felt a sense of relief. Optimus Prime was deeply grateful to David for helping the Autobots out of their predicament and even offering them new hope. Originally, he had considered taking the Autobots off Earth and finding a new home if Earth truly didn't welcome them. Now, he was seriously considering the feasibility of having all the Autobots settle in Winterfell. Unaware of Optimus Prime's changing mind, David was now focused on treating RC. RC's three bodies were laid out together. David also spotted some Decepticon body parts Ratchet had gathered, including the Hermit's body. Are you trying to give RC the Hermit's abilities? I just think the parts on this body are relatively intact. Can RC gain Hermit's abilities? I don't know, but we can try. Ratchet unleashed various wires, connecting all three bodies to RC. David unleashed a powerful holy light, restoring RC's spark, giving it enough energy to fuel its recovery, prioritizing the separated sparks and the parts connected to it. Watching as RC absorbed and transformed the various parts, the once fragmented and diminutive RC began to undergo a dramatic transformation. After expanding for a moment, absorbing all the Hermit's parts into herself, and becoming roughly the size of an ordinary Autobot, she suddenly began to shrink again. David, Ratchet, and the surrounding Autobots didn't raise any questions about this change. They could all sense the state of RC's spark, and as long as it wasn't suddenly extinguished, there was no need to worry. As the light gradually faded and dissipated, a brand new RC appeared before everyone. Her appearance was more pink than before, but compared to her previous mechanical form, constructed from motorcycle parts, this RC was closer to her G1 form, even closer to Earth humans than her G1 counterpart, with even her height and build being similar to that of an average human. How do you feel? RC checked her hands, sensing the state of her spark, and also checked her various stats. She concluded that her current state was not much different from her peak, and she had even gained some new abilities. After briefly describing her situation, the Autobots congratulated RC on her recovery. Furthermore, I can now assume a human form, just like David, RC said, explaining that she had perfectly mastered the abilities of a hermit warrior, now a true hermit warrior. As for vehicle form, I might need to scan a new one. Her original motorcycle form no longer suited her, now she needed to scan a full-sized car. Unlike David, her body had been compressed to its current human-sized form by Cybertronian technology, allowing her to transform into a full-sized car. Speaking of vehicles, I just loaded a flight module for you. Can you use it? Flight module, RC hadn't noticed. She pulled up the data and realized she actually had one. Can I transform into a plane? She remembered David had mentioned wanting to bring a few fighter jets to Wintertown. Installing the flight module, was he hoping she'd help with aerial reconnaissance and ensure Wintertown's air supremacy? Try it. I'm not sure if it'll work. If it worked, David's trip would be a real win. Car form. Fighter form, Cybertronian body, a robot dog that could be a pet, if he could be revived, and a team of diggers that could significantly speed up Wintertown's construction, if he could be revived. To ensure that Robo-Dog and the Digger team could truly be resurrected by David, he wouldn't leave immediately. Instead, he needed to obtain a fragment of the L-Spark. Currently, the fragments were in human custody. However, Sam Witwicky, the protagonist, also possessed a fragment. David didn't need to personally assist Bumblebee in this matter, he could have done it with the help of Bumblebee. While Bumblebee was helping David retrieve the fragments, David, along with the Autobots, other than Bumblebee, and the entire High Force, returned to the military base in North America. Having just fought a major battle, the High Force had been granted a break. The Decepticons had recently suffered heavy losses, and everyone assumed they wouldn't be threatening Earth anytime soon. David and RC were selecting new skins. After testing, RC confirmed that she could indeed use the flight module, meaning she had gained the ability to transform into an airplane. RC was most surprised to learn that she not only gained the ability to transform into an airplane, but also retained the ability to transform into a car. This meant RC had become a triple transformer plus a hermit, perhaps a quad transformer. By comparison, David wasn't quite a multiplayer, as his vehicle form came from external accessories, and it would take time for him to become a true multiplayer. Are you really planning on changing your aircraft form to an F-14 Tomcat? Epps looked at David. He felt that David's current Raptor form was better, right? To Cybertronians, these vehicle forms are just appearances, unless they scanned higher-level technological products and were able to analyze and replicate these new technologies. Changes in form wouldn't affect Cybertronians' combat effectiveness. Just as David was explaining to Epps why he wanted to change his form, RC completed the scan of her aircraft form. She didn't choose any of the fighter jets in the row, but instead chose the A-10 ground attack aircraft. Chapter 171 Awakening the Sleeping Soul Again. RC, having regained flight mode, didn't continue scanning for the new Autobot form, but followed David back to Wintertown. After Bumblebee helped bring the Allspark fragment from Sam back to David, he no longer had any reason to stay in this world. With everything he needed, he now planned to attempt to revive the Diggers. Or, More accurately, to use these mass-produced Decepticons to create a Digger team unique to Wintertown. Because the Diggers' bodies were relatively large, Optimus Prime sent Ironhide and Ratchet to Wintertown to assist, also wanting to let these two veterans see how David planned to resurrect the Decepticons. If David truly possessed the ability to revive Cybertronians, his importance to the Autobots would rise even further. Before leaving, David gave Optimus Prime a few extra pieces of information. First, the leadership module was in Egypt, but finding it might require some effort. Second, there was a crashed Cybertronian spacecraft on the far side of the moon, containing the former Autobot leader, Megatron, who had already collaborated with the Decepticons. Third, there are humans on Earth who are loyal to the Decepticons. The next threat from humanity, besides those politicians, will also come from these traitors. After giving these 3 pieces of information, David left. Optimus Prime, having received his hint, wondered if he could change the Autobots' future on Earth, where they were hunted by various forces. However, as long as Optimus Prime and the Autobots didn't turn against him, these Cybertronian refugees were already invincible. Returning to Wintertown, his true territory, David felt a sense of relief. He no longer had to pretend to be a Cybertronian, something he wasn't good at. Even with the ability to become a hermit warrior, it was merely an additional combat tool for him, not something he could use to disguise himself or conduct infiltration. Anyway, I've achieved my goal. Looking at the pile of Decepticon corpses piled in the open space east of Wintertown, and the several companions gathered around them to examine them, David took a quick look and noticed Laura wasn't there. Laura hasn't returned yet, sir. Miss Crawford hasn't returned since she left for Mr. Will Turner's hometown. Elias, upon seeing David return, competently moved to David's side and immediately answered his question. Oh, it seems she's having a great time with Will. Since she hasn't returned, it proves she's having a great time and hasn't encountered any danger. Thinking about it, there aren't many beings in the Caribbean world that could pose a threat to Laura, or even very few, so there's no need to worry about her safety. Besides, Laura is accompanied by Sylvanus Windrunner, so it's a good thing those two aren't causing any trouble. Stepping forward, David spotted Leonard, Sheldon, Howard, and Raj in the crowd. The 4 of them were diligently examining the pile of Decepticon corpses before them. They had already seen Transformers and discussed the differences between carbon-based and silicon-based life with Ratchet. Sheldon even seriously inquired about the possibility of transforming carbon-based life into silicon-based life. But discussing Transformers wasn't the same as actually studying them. Several scientists were eager to delve into their research, even engaging in arguments. You're just an engineer? How could you possibly understand such a unique life form? You're just a theoretical physicist. Do you even know how to conduct real research? Raj, you should be studying the stars, not Transformers. Transformers are the brightest stars in the universe. Such words echoed in their ears, but no one intervened. They were used to the occasional bickering between these 4. After all, no matter how they argued, they remained best friends. David didn't interrupt them. Instead, he noticed Gina poking at them with her staff, leaving him speechless. Master Proudmore, Baron Glamorgan, retracting her staff, Gina greeted David with formal courtesy. What you just did, he didn't think Gina was just poking with her staff out of boredom. After all, she was a student of Antonidas, Archmage of the Kirin Tor and leader of Dalaran, and one of the finest young mages on Azeroth. I was observing these Cybertronians to see if they reacted to arcane energy. Okay. While the scientists were still arguing over who is qualified to study the Decepticon corpses, the female maid had quietly completed a test. What were the results? Nothing special. Gina shook her head, then asked David if he had anything to ask her. She had been in Wintertown for quite some time, but her relationship with David was very official, as evidenced by the way they greeted each other. I know you've been trying to establish a connection between Brunia and Azeroth. I'd like to know how things are going. Since arriving in Wintertown, Gina had spent her time researching, either by asking people for information or by hiding away. Wintertown had nothing particularly pressing her attention, leaving her with plenty of time for magical research. Her research focused on how to draw arcane energy relatively freely while under lockdown. And could a stable transmission channel between Brunia and Azeroth be established? She didn't expect to be able to teleport freely between the two worlds. She was content with being able to send some messages back to Azeroth. Unfortunately, both research projects were currently at a standstill. She still couldn't freely mobilize the arcane energy of this world, and many spells were blocked. Although she had learned from Pierre Newton how to safely steal arcane energy, she no longer had to worry about replenishing her own reserves. However, the inability to cast many spells had a significant impact on her combat effectiveness. Jaina even considered carrying a longsword or a piano pistol for self-defense. In contrast, Sylvanas could replenish her lost arcane energy through the methods Newton had taught her, so her combat effectiveness was not significantly affected. The difference between their situations further infuriated Jaina. A powerful mage, she had suddenly become half useless. Never in her life had she felt so frustrated. She vowed to research and achieve a result. However, success was still a long way off. I see. Learning that Jaina's research had made no progress, David knew he had no way of communicating with Fording. He could only wait for Fording's arrival, and then have Fording take him to Azeroth. Until then, the Decepticons would remain here, allowing them to observe and study them. He didn't have to wait long. On the third day, he caught up with Fording arriving at Wintertown. Are these Cybertronians? Looking at the Decepticon corpses piled in the open space outside the town, Fording inquired carefully and learned that they were the remains of the Autobots' enemies, the Decepticons. David had brought these bodies here with the intention of resurrecting them and transforming them into Cybertronian engineering teams serving Wintertown. Upon hearing David's idea, Fording was a bit confused. Will it work? It should. During the 2 days he waited for Fording, David also studied the Allspark fragment, even absorbing and merging it, gaining a deeper understanding of this magical object. While David couldn't transform ordinary tech into Cybertronians like a genuine Allspark could, he could still rekindle a Cybertronian spark and perform some programming on them. However, to do that requires a tremendous amount of energy, so I need to go to Azeroth. There, he could leverage Azeroth's authority to mobilize nearly unlimited energy, compared to David's current capabilities. Combined with his own absorption of the Allspark fragments and the corpses of these Decepticons, the Cybertronian engineering team was already beckoning. Okay, I'll go say hello to Raynor and Sally and ask them if they want to go back to see old Mograine, then I'll take you there. Fording glanced at the Decepticon corpses not far away. They were all enormous. Besides, if we want to bring these bodies over, you'll have to make some arrangements, right? Ironhide and the ambulance are in town, they'll help. Oh, Fording nodded and went to find Raynor Mograine and Sally Whitemane, who represented the Kingdom of Lordaeron in Winterhold. David went to find the ambulance and Ironhide. When Fordring returned with the two young men, Jaina was also with him. She, too, was returning to Azeroth. I wanted to invite Sylvanas along, but I heard she's not in town. Well, she and Laura went to Will's hometown to have fun. Ha ha ha. To be honest, if it weren't for a lot of things going on in the Kingdom of Lordaeron, I would also like to find a place to relax. Proper relaxation can allow you to better devote yourself to work. How about I say hello to Leon? Zombies. Fording immediately shook his head and waved his hands. I've killed enough zombies, ghouls and so on. Oh, that's right, I overlooked the situation over there. David glanced at Sheldon, who looked reluctant not far away. How about, stay with Leonard and the others for a few days? That's something I can consider. Fording thought that he had never been to Earth, and it would be nice to live there for a while. When I'm done with this busy period, I'll ask Leonard's opinion in person. Leonard and the others will definitely be happy to welcome you. Chapter 172 Digging Tiger and Robot Dog. If Fordring had expressed a desire to stay with Leonard for a few days, Leonard would have been thrilled beyond belief. Due to the potential for an overreaction, Fordring and David decided not to tell Leonard about this until they had actually decided to depart. Thanks to the efforts of Ironhide, Ratchet, and RC, the 6 Decepticon corpses were transported to Azeroth. Jaina, Raynor, Sally, and the others also returned to their more familiar worlds. Jaina would travel to Dalaran, then back to Kultiris, before returning to Fordring, who would lead them to Winterhold. She had already made it clear that she would continue to serve as Dalaran's diplomat in Winterhold. Raynor and Sally were going to meet old Mograine, and David had no idea whether they would return to Winterhold afterward. After the two young men left, Fording said, Renault's under too much pressure here. I think it's the right thing for him to stay with you. Aren't you worried you'll get too comfortable with me and become useless? No, Renault is a very ambitious child. Renault Mograine's dark turn stemmed from his ambition, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't get his father's approval, so he turned. Now that Fording has separated father and son, giving Renault a relatively relaxed environment, free from the constant pressure from his father, he should be able to avoid his previous path. Now, I'm more interested in seeing how you plan to resurrect these Cybertronians." Knowing David was going to resurrect these Decepticons, Fording had carefully selected an open area before bringing David and the Autobots over. Soldiers from the Knights of the Silver Hand were standing guard, so there was no need to worry about anyone suddenly rushing in and disturbing David. Fording's arrangements were quite cautious, but he had never anticipated that this matter would pose no pressure at all for David. After all, he wasn't the primary source of damage. Looking at the mass-produced Decepticon corpses lined up before him, David infused them with holy light one by one, reigniting their sparks. As they did so, he could also transform them to suit his own vision. Initially, he thought, even if he absorbed and fused the Allspark fragments, it wouldn't be an easy task. But then, this thing isn't much different from creating a character in a game. Looking at the data of the Decepticon in front of him on the display screen, visible only to him, David could easily design its humanoid form and vehicle mode, even implanting a core program in its spark. Pledge allegiance to David. David implanted this program in the sparks of 6 Decepticons, then fully activated the sparks of several more. And so, the G1-style excavator team stood before David. A shovel, a crane, a mixer, a sweeper, a bulldozer, and a trailer. 6 Cybertronians received their own names. Technically, these 6 Cybertronians weren't resurrected, but rather reborn. They were simply new Cybertronians created from the remains of 6 mass-produced Decepticons, imbued with the Allspark by David. Sir, the scrapers, hook, mixer, sweeper, bulldozer, and tractor, salute you. The new Cybertronian engineering team, resembling the G1 excavators, lined up, their Decepticon insignia replaced with a wolf head emblem of Baron Glamorgan of Wintertown. The 6 tall Cybertronians knelt on one knee before David, pledging their loyalty, then stood at his signal. Nearby, Ratchet and Ironhide witnessed the entire process and recognized that these 6 Cybertronians weren't resurrected Decepticons, but rather newly born beings. This is a power equivalent to the Allspark. Ironhide turned to look at Ratchet again, reminding him to master this ability as quickly as possible. Ratchet suspected that Ironhide's data processor wasn't the only thing broken, his detectors were, too. Could he see the immense and terrifying amount of energy David had just expended? Was that something he could do? If he could do something like that, would Cybertron still be destroyed? He could wipe out all the Decepticons with a wave of his hand. RC noticed something else. When David resurrected the Decepticons, he seemed to be able to implant certain commands within their minds. Did that mean he could do the same with other Autobots? Like, herself? She had already confirmed that David hadn't inserted any strange commands into his spark, which seemed to prove his trustworthiness. So why would David do that to these team members, nicknamed the Diggers? Is it for safety? Thinking about it, it seemed like there was only one reason. After all, David was resurrecting a few Decepticons, so taking some precautions was understandable. The 3 Autobots each had their own ideas, while David was testing the abilities of the new Diggers. The results were surprising. Although David had specifically configured several individuals' abilities during his creation, he wasn't sure if they would actually live up to his expectations. For example, the mixer itself was designed so that the digger could place various materials into its mixing bucket and then produce the desired finished product. A pile of ore would pour out, and a formed steel beam would pour directly out. The process was incredibly irrational and time-saving, and David had initially suspected that even with his own design, he wouldn't necessarily be able to achieve this ability perfectly. However, after seeing the actual results, David was certain that his Wintertown would be ready in no time. And not just Wintertown. He had originally thought that simple equipment would be needed for a while to handle the power plant and waterworks, but with these diggers, he could easily build a sufficiently large power plant and waterworks in a matter of days. The only problem was that these diggers were relatively low in intelligence, perhaps because they were born from the bodies of mass-produced machines, or perhaps because they were truly newly created. But this didn't stop them from following David's orders. That's enough. This situation wasn't a drawback for David. The real drawback is that while this digger team is formidable, they have too little in the way of data, making them a significant disadvantage in their open-ended work. In other words, if David provides detailed blueprints and lets the diggers build, they can quickly complete the work. But if David simply states, "I need a certain building," without any specifics, the digger's efficiency is limited. Scrapper, the digger team leader, possesses a natural talent for engineering and design, but he needs sufficient knowledge to fully utilize his talents. That shouldn't be a problem. Cybertronians learned this kind of knowledge quickly, said RC, who had been observing the new Cybertronians alongside David. She, too, had noticed the diggers' problems. Well, we can just bring scrap or some data from the modern world. Such data is readily available, whether in the Transformers world or Lore Zone. The only question is whether Optimus Prime can provide some Cybertronian technical data. The digger team was successfully resurrected. The technical data would be handled later. David then retrieved the body of the robot dog. Is this Soundwave's robot dog? Ironhide, one of the Autobots' mainstays, was of course familiar with Soundwave's robot dog. He hadn't expected David to kill it, even its body stolen. Yes, you want to resurrect this robot dog, of course. I'm a hunter, so I need a pet to help me fight. David answered RC and Ironhide's questions while releasing holy light to revive it. A similar situation had occurred. David could still adjust and redesign the robot dog, but he didn't make too many changes to the robot dog. He simply changed its single eye to 2 and made its body smoother and less sharp. Well, let's keep calling it robot dog. David, looking at the cat-like robot dog before him, had no intention of giving it a new name. Raising his right hand, the robot dog lunged forward and transformed into a bracelet, which he placed on his free right wrist. After finishing everything, David briefly exchanged a hello and a thank you to the guy who refused to get up, only to receive a rather unfriendly reply. Aware that he had disturbed the other person's sleep, David then chatted with Fording for a few more words. He learned that everything was going smoothly in Lordaeron, and the operation to recapture the capital of Lordaeron was progressing steadily. If all went well, Lordaeron's capital would be recaptured by the time autumn arrived in Wintertown, and the long work of cleanup and repairs would follow. Maybe I'll need the use of these diggers then. If you need anything, feel free to ask. By the time Lordaeron's capital was recaptured, Wintertown should have completed all its construction work. Sending the diggers to Lordaeron wouldn't be a big deal, and it would earn some foreign currency along the way. After deciding to continue this 3 or 4 day trip to Winterville, David said goodbye to Fording and returned to Wintertown with his new diggers, his pet robo-dog, and a few Autobots. The people who had been waiting in the open space east of town knew David had succeeded when they saw him return with the diggers. There really are diggers. Leonard and the others excitedly looked at the familiar green and purple transformers before them, pulling out all the construction materials they had prepared. Seeing their excitement, David suddenly remembered, I forgot these guys could provide a lot of information. Chapter 173 The Swan family moves to Wintertown. The arrival of the diggers immediately boosted Wintertown's construction speed. In just a few days, Winterhold, once barely a skeleton, had taken shape. At this rate, the diggers would have completed the core of Wintertown in less than a month. Carpenters and other craftsmen would then begin furnishing the interior, and David could then consider officially moving into his new home. The unexpectedly fast pace even prompted Van Cleef to exclaim, "You should have brought the diggers sooner." Had Van Cleef known of the diggers' capabilities, he would have provided an even more ambitious design. With the diggers' cooperation, he firmly believed everyone would have a new home by autumn. You can't force things like that. If Wintertown hadn't been upgraded, David's cheat code wouldn't have been upgraded. Without it, he wouldn't have been able to travel to Azeroth. Without it, he wouldn't have known he could borrow a portion of Azeroth's authority and mobilize such a vast amount of holy light. Consequently, he would be unable to activate a Cybertronian body, much less possess the ability to resurrect or create a digger. These events were linked one to another, and it was by following this path that he gained the current strength. Looking up at RC, who circled in the air before flying off into the distance, David knew she was on a routine patrol. Ever since RC acquired airplane mode, she had taken on the bulk of the patrol work in Wintertown, but that didn't mean the soldiers had an easy time. Floyd and Gareth Stanton were unimpressed with the soldiers' abilities and rigorously drilled them whenever they had free time. Lord Glamorgan had made it clear that they were training the Knights of Winter, not the Winter Infantry or the Winter Militia. "Look at you. How can you even look like a knight?" the soldiers would privately grumble. "I'm not a knight," but they dared not slack off during training, diligently completing every drill. Especially with their firearms instructor, Jack Krauser, frequently training alongside them under the 2 Lord Knights, they felt they had no reason to slack off. Furthermore, for these young men, training them as knights offered, in a sense, a brighter future. Lord Glamorgan desired the Winter Knights, and the order couldn't remain limited forever. Surely it would expand in the future? And with expansion, promotions would be granted. right? And wouldn't those who performed well possibly earn knighthood? The thought of escaping their pawn status and becoming a noble lord knight filled these young men with motivation. When David returned from the construction site and observed the temporary barracks, he saw a group of young men, including Krauser, roaring through their training. The workload was immense, and even Krauser, a special forces soldier who had regained his peak physical condition, found it difficult to endure. Thanks to his time studying hunter lore with Sylvanus, and thanks to Pierre Newton's knowledge of how to draw arcane energy, David's physical strength was enhanced by the arcane energy. David had visited the site and discovered that Pierre had crafted a special alchemical tool to infuse arcane energy into clean water. This water, then imbued with arcane energy, was then consumed by someone skilled in harnessing it. As the water was consumed, the energy in the water was mobilized and stored, so the process of replenishing arcane energy could not be interrupted. While this method of acquiring arcane energy might appear similar to David's direct infusion of holy light, it was fundamentally different. Even if the recipient lacked natural talent, the holy light David infused would remain within them and exert certain effects, such as automatically aiding their recovery. If someone lacks the relevant talent for absorbing arcane energy through this method, the arcane energy will not be absorbed or stored. Instead, it will slowly dissipate, transforming back into scattered, unclaimed energy. Therefore, even with the alchemist's methods for collecting and absorbing arcane energy, becoming a spellcaster remains a difficult task. After observing the soldiers' training for a while, David also reviewed the knight's training schedule. According to Flores and Gareth Stanton's training plan, all members of the Winter Knights are currently in the first phase of training. This involves honing their bodies first and cultivating a strong will and tolerance for pain through rigorous training. Furthermore, since Lord Glamorgan wanted a knight's order, not ordinary soldiers, the intensity of this first phase of training is staggering, normally requiring the assistance of apothecaries and alchemists. However, since beginning to study the holy light, the two knights suddenly discovered. In Wintertown, even without the assistance of apothecaries and alchemists, they could confidently train their soldiers without worrying about harming them. Liadrin, the priest of the light, was their greatest guarantee. If the Winter Knights, as Baron Glamorgan had initially mentioned, had been merely a wishful thinking, the two knights now saw their true potential. They even began to wonder if they could train the Winter Knights into knighthood whose members mastered the light. In their conversations with Liadrin, they learned that such a powerful order existed elsewhere. Tyrion Fordring, a man they occasionally encountered, was a powerful paladin, one of the founders of that order and currently its grand commander. Liadrin also explained to the two knights, the great Lord David Glamorgan is the embodiment of the light. How could knights loyal to Lord Glamorgan not understand the light? So, after daily training, except for soldiers on night patrol, Liadrin would gather them to study holy light knowledge. Regardless of understanding, they would memorize it. From the moment Liadrin began disseminating holy light knowledge to the Winter Knights, David realized that his newly formed order was actually developing into a Paladin order. He had no objections. In fact, when Renaud Maugraine and Sally Whitemane returned to Wintertown a few days later, he assigned them to serve as guest instructors. Renaud Maugraine was a true Paladin, having received extensive training since childhood. He had the most advanced understanding of how to train a Paladin. Sally Whitemane was a powerful holy light priest, deeply versed in holy light teachings and able to share Liadrin's burden. With the support of these two holy light priests and the direct participation of true Paladins, the Winter Knights' training schedule had doubled in length. The last time it had lengthened was when Krauser became an instructor and added extensive training in firearms. Now, let's look at the Winter Knights' training plan. If all is completed, the Knights of Wintertown will become Paladins proficient in both cold and hot weapons, capable of navigating mountains and seas in heavy armor, and equipped with a wealth of modern military vehicle knowledge. Indeed, R.C., who had been relatively free, eventually joined in, teaching the aspiring knights how to operate cars, motorcycles, and airplanes. To facilitate the training, R.C. and Ratchet returned to the Transformers universe and helped transport several vehicles, 3 Humvees, 5 motorcycles, a Black Hawk helicopter, and a Harrier fighter jet. Seeing this array of military vehicles, not only David was stunned, but the entire Winter Knights' new recruits were stunned. They felt they wouldn't be able to escape their rookie status for another 3 to 5 years. Just as David watched the progress at the construction site grow steadily worse, and the Winter Knights' training schedule grew longer and longer, with no end in sight, Laura and Sylvanus finally returned. To David's surprise, Laura and Sylvanus hadn't returned alone. They'd even brought Elizabeth Swan with them, and they asked David if they could bring more people to settle in Winterfell. Of course, what happened? While Laura explained the situation to David, Will had already begun helping Elizabeth with a migration process. David soon met Elizabeth's father, Governor Weatherby Swan. Governor Weatherby hadn't come alone either. He was accompanied by a number of people, who, judging by their attire, appeared to be his servants and retainers. Elizabeth and her father are in some trouble, Laura explained quickly, and David quickly understood the situation. Laura and Sylvanus had traveled to Caribbean World, and Elizabeth Swan, their host, had volunteered to serve as their guide. With a naturally adventurous spirit, the three women simply hired a ship, assembled a crew, and set sail. During this time, some interesting and infuriating events occurred, such as Lord Becket, who traveled from mainland Britain to Port Royal and claimed that the Swan family was colluding with pirates. Laura, who knew the subsequent plot, remembered that Governor Weatherby was killed by this Lord Becket. She got along well with Elizabeth and did not want to watch Elizabeth lose her father, so she persuaded Elizabeth to take her father away from Port Royal, a place of trouble, and settle in Wintertown. Elizabeth, of course, agreed wholeheartedly to this suggestion. She had long despised the backward, ignorant, and dirty Port Royal. And so, the Swan family moved to Wintertown. Chapter 174. The new home is finally built. Although Wintertown had only just begun its modernization, Will, as Wintertown's first blacksmith, had access to a wealth of first-hand information and equipment. Through long hours of intensive training, he had learned that most of his fellow comrades came from worlds more advanced than his own. Even Tyrion Fordring, who seemed to hail from the ancient, possessed advanced technology from Azeroth. After learning so much and living in the clean and tidy Wintertown for so long, he became increasingly reluctant to return to Port Royal. Elizabeth was in a similar situation. After learning that David planned to transform Wintertown into a city with advanced infrastructure, she had considered having her father move there more than once. After all, the job of governor wasn't a lifelong one. Upon leaving office, he'd simply have to bring his entire fortune to Wintertown. The only unexpected change was her father's premature departure, and the rather awkward manner of his departure. Glad to meet you, Baron Glamorgan. Weatherby Swan had served as governor for many years, seasoned in the political world. Despite the unexpected circumstances and the inexplicable arrival in a strange place, led by his daughter, he showed no sign of panic or confusion. Instead, he carefully adjusted his clothes, ensuring he hadn't been impolite, before respectfully greeting David. Welcome, Mr. Weatherby Swan. Weatherby Swan's arrival brought a new population to Wintertown, though these individuals primarily served the Swan family and might eventually serve both the Swan and Turner families. David was surprised to learn that, in addition to Weatherby Swan and his attendants, there was another figure among the fleeing group, James Norrington. The Commodore of Port Royal, originally a law-abiding commander with a deep dislike for pirates, was inexplicably accused of colluding with pirates. Beckett's goal was to seize power in Port Royal, and Norrington, as the military commander, was naturally on his list of targets. It was for this reason that when Elizabeth enlisted Laura and Sylvanus's help in launching a counterattack against Lord Becket, Norrington joined in, effectively ending his service in the Royal Navy. With nowhere else to go, Norrington was invited by Governor Weatherby Swan, who greatly admired him, to Winterfell, a place Elizabeth described as a magical place where we could begin a new life without fear of retaliation from England. Although Norrington had once pursued Elizabeth and was a rival for Will, upon realizing Elizabeth's lack of affection and Will's shared love, he abruptly withdrew and offered his blessing to the couple. His gentlemanly demeanor also impressed Will, so Will also welcomed Norrington to Wintertown, even earnestly recommending the former British Royal Navy Commodore to David. Although Wintertown currently has no navy, not even a fishing boat, I believe James will be able to help you in the future. Will glanced at the vast river not far away. A river like the Winter River, with its enormous flow, would sooner or later be utilized by David. When that time came, a former admiral with extensive experience would undoubtedly be of great significance. Wintertown won't remain without a navy forever. After personally welcoming Weatherby Swan and James Norrington, it was Elizabeth and Will's responsibility to decide how to arrange these people. David was pulled aside by Laura. Once he was surrounded by his own people, he suddenly pulled something out of his storage bracelet. Look at this. What is this? David looked at the object in Laura's hand. It looked like a stick? Or perhaps some kind of weapon? Some ancient weapon with special significance. It's Poseidon's trident, David suddenly remembered. The Caribbean world did have Poseidon's trident, a rather unique-looking thing. The trident he remembered didn't look like this, did it? Is this the trident? David pointed to the end Laura was holding up. Where are the prongs? Something happened, it broke. Laura didn't think anything was wrong. Thinking back to her previous adventures, although she always succeeded in achieving her goals, her objects were always destroyed by various things, and in the end, only scraps of souvenirs remained. Compared to her previous adventures, she felt that bringing back the trident relatively intact this time was a great improvement. Besides, whether it has forks or not isn't important. I want to know what kind of power this thing actually possesses. Aren't you curious? I am. Poseidon's trident was a legitimate artifact. While it looked a bit unsightly, like a rotting piece of wood, it must have held some powerful mystical power. Perhaps by successfully unleashing that mystical power, the trident would suddenly radiate and reveal its true beauty. With this thought, his aversion to the ungainly staff in front of him softened. He turned it over and over in his hands, even testing it with holy light, but nothing happened. I've already tried that, and it doesn't just react to holy light, it doesn't react to arcane energy either. David looked at Laura, inwardly admiring her sheer audacity. She dared to try anything. Wasn't she afraid of provoking Poseidon? After all, those creatures in Greek mythology weren't exactly anything to be trifled with. As if seeing through David's inner complaints, Laura replied bluntly, if Poseidon really shows up, I'll immediately run back to Wintertown. With a readily available return-to-town skill, she wasn't worried about provoking any powerful enemies. Laura then asked about David's situation. I thought you'd stay in that world for a long time, but you've returned before me. Things are simpler over there. Things in the Transformers world weren't complicated to begin with, and David even enlisted the help of both the Autobots and human officials to achieve his goals. If he were left to fend for himself, it would be a hassle. Not only would he have to travel the world, but he'd also have to deal with multiple factions, each one dissatisfied or stirring up trouble. Laura, for example, wanted to enjoy the adventure and personally search for and obtain the trident. Even without considering other things, the journey across the sea alone would take a considerable amount of time. However, one went on a serious business trip, the other on a leisurely and relaxing one. This fundamental difference led to their different approaches. While discussing their respective gains, he took Laura to see the digger. Seeing these massive Cybertron engineers rapidly constructing various structures, it looked like Winter Fortress, originally thought to be finished by autumn, would be ready for occupancy before then. At this rate, you should really think about what furniture you need. By the way, I'll take RC to your place when I have time. Why? RC wants to scan a supercar and make it her own. I've thought about it, and I think you're the only one who can fulfill her request. Unlike David, who chose an American muscle car, RC preferred European supercars. As for whether supercars could actually run in Brunia, RC didn't care. With the development of Wintertown, there would be suitable roads sooner or later. I do have a few sports cars at home, but I don't care much about them, so we only have a few. Do you want me to buy a few? David had originally thought of having Laura take RC to a car show or something to scan them, but Laura didn't expect her to start talking about buying a few cars, her tone almost like she was going downstairs to buy 2 bottles of beer. You can do whatever you want with that. Laura was indeed being casual. After returning to Wintertown and resting for a day, she took RC to her own world the next day and quickly returned with a scanned image of a new car. David looked at RC before him. He wasn't surprised that RC had chosen a McLaren P1 as her car image, nor was he surprised that RC had also scanned a human image. He was surprised by the image itself. Did you copy this image from the movie Casablanca? It's the data Laura provided. RC looked at herself, quite satisfied with her current human form. Is there something wrong with it? No problem. If you find it strange, I can change to another form. RC found the Hermit Warrior's abilities intriguing, especially the ability to constantly change forms. David shared this sentiment, though he preferred to tinker with mechanical forms. It would be great if I could keep multiple templates from my image data, so I could transform into whatever I wanted. As RC's daily patrols, combined with teaching soldiers how to fly vehicles and aircraft, and honing his own transformation abilities, David settled into a stable yet tedious training routine. The Swan family gradually adjusted to life in Wintertown. Time passed as the winter nights were tortured to death by their instructors. As the hottest days of summer passed, The diggers finally completed all of Wintertown's infrastructure, including the palace that would become David and his family's new home. David began to feel a sense of unease as he gazed upon the building before him, which, save for the color of the walls, resembled the famous house. His companions had gathered around him, all looking at him. Laura, speaking for all, asked, "I'm afraid the name Winter Fortress isn't quite right. Have you decided on a name for your new home?" Chapter 175, Castle Glamorgan on the Northern Plains. Glamorgan Castle? Winter Palace? Winterhold? David suggested a few names, but received no response. Everyone's expressions were similar, as if they thought the names were rather ordinary. "Let's paint the whole building white." Howard's joking suggestion garnered some response. Some thought that since they were already copying the exterior, keeping the name was a good idea. But David still felt the name wasn't a good one, worried it would attract the cancer administrators sent by the Space-Time Administration. "How about Wolfberg?" Laura pondered for a moment before offering her own suggestion. "Didn't you choose the giant wolf as the main element of the family crest?" "That seems okay." David thought Wolfberg was a good name, it just felt like he'd heard it somewhere before. "But it sounds so familiar, there's a football club with that name," Laura thought carefully, wondering if that was why David felt so familiar. But David, after much reflection, decided that wasn't the reason. It wasn't until he turned and looked at the vast green grasslands around him that a glimmer of understanding dawned on him. He suspected that if he named his residence Wolfberg, he'd never eat mutton again. "Let's just call it Glamorgan Castle." Naming places and residences after their lords wasn't unusual, and it wouldn't spark controversy or criticism. But David hadn't expected that everyone still found the nickname Wolfberg easier to remember, preferring it to refer to the new building. Glamorgan Castle, known as Wolfberg, was a large house that appeared 3 stories on the outside, but actually had 6 floors, including the basement. While the design was inspired by the famous building, the internal structure wasn't completely copied, and the specific layout did differ. The above-ground floors were the main areas of activity. The ground floor housed the reception hall, banquet hall, and ballroom, as well as offices for Glamorgan Castle staff and servants, a lounge, kitchen, small library, and map room. The second floor housed Lord David's bedroom and office, a small reception and reception room, and a study. The office rooms were located on the south side of the building, while the private living quarters were located on the north. The third floor houses a gymnasium, games room, and other spaces for the Lord's entertainment and relaxation. There are also many undecided rooms, which David can use according to his preferences and needs. The basement level is currently primarily a warehouse, storing food and some weapons and equipment. The second basement level is smaller, housing separate water and electricity systems. However, this level contains a hidden passageway leading to the outside, providing direct access to specialized compartments on each floor, allowing the Lord to evacuate if necessary. The fourth floor, above ground, is not a complete floor but a semi-open structure, allowing David to access the spacious rooftop, where he can enjoy the fresh air, take in the view, or hold outdoor events. In theory, each floor should have rooms for guards and servants, but David believes he won't need so many guards. Furthermore, upon completion, a high wall will be built around Castle Glamorgan. Besides enclosing the castle, the Wintertown Municipal Building and a military barracks will be built to the southwest and east of the castle, respectively. A large expanse of open space will be left on the north side of Glamorgan Castle, serving as Lord Glamorgan's private garden, featuring a fountain, gardens, lawns, and other amenities. Tall trees will be planted along the inner perimeter of the walls to obscure the perimeter, so that those gazing from the gardens will perceive themselves as surrounded by greenery rather than a high wall. Once all buildings are completed, Glamorgan Castle, the town hall, the barracks, and the high walls will form the true winter fortress. The outer walls of the winter fortress will have 4 gates. The east gate will serve as the barracks' daily exit, facilitating the entry and exit of soldiers and officers stationed there. The north and west gates will serve as the Lord's private gates, allowing friends and the Lord himself to enter and exit through these gates. Guard posts will be stationed at these gates, housing soldiers. The south gate is the main entrance to Winter Fortress. Entering from here is like entering the heart of Wintertown. Anyone entering through the south gate would find the Wintertown Municipal Center to their left, where Wintertown's administrative staff would work. Facing them was the Lord's Castle of Glamorgan, and to the right stood the barracks responsible for guarding the fortress. After a brief survey, David decided to construct a building northwest of Fort Glamorgan to serve as a garage and his own private training ground. Whether it was shooting, fighting, cold weapons, or alchemy, he needed a place to practice. Furthermore, the proximity to Fort Glamorgan would facilitate the construction of a corridor connecting the two buildings. These things are easy. After jotting down David's requirements in his notebook, Van Cleef prepared to return with a complete design. Once David was satisfied, he would hand it over to the bulldozers, who would complete the construction of several buildings surrounding Fort Glamorgan as quickly as possible. From now on, the entire Winter Town, or Winter City, would be built around Winter Fortress, with expansion extending outward. According to the current plan, a ring of wide roads will be built around Winter Fortress. With Winter Fortress at its center, 4 main roads will extend in 4 directions, forming the main arteries of Winter City's transportation network. David envisions these main roads extending westward to the banks of the Winter River, paving the way for the future construction of the Winter Docks. To the north, they will extend a short distance into the Winter Forest, connecting to power plants, waterworks, and other industrial facilities. To the east and south, they will extend all the way to the outposts and signposts, and even an additional road will be built northeast to the outskirts of Frostbite Town. This isn't meant to showcase Winter Town's current infrastructure strength, it simply facilitates soldiers' distant patrols. With the proliferation of modern vehicles, Winter Town soldiers have already mastered their skills, and patrolling the border on motorcycles or even Humvees has become commonplace. Only fighter jet driving requires a higher level of literacy, and no one has yet mastered it. Building a sufficiently high-quality road will also facilitate faster travel for soldiers. After discussing the upcoming construction plan with Van Cleef and the diggers, David and some of his companions wandered around the area. He glanced at the nearby cabins. Everyone knew they wouldn't last much longer. Once Winterhold was complete, they would be demolished. Why not keep them? Because they're located in the heart of Wintertown. Such an important place would surely require many better and more important buildings. Laura reached out and gently stroked the exterior of her cabin, answering Sylvanus's question. According to David's plan, this should be Winterhold's Southgate Square. Although the cabins weren't particularly comfortable, cramped, and generally crude, she felt she'd think of them often in the future. David's thoughts were much simpler. While the cabin was filled with memories, he wasn't overly nostalgic. Instead, he was happy to have made it this far. However, he knew his opinion wasn't universal, so he suggested to Laura, "If you want, I can have Digger move the entire cabin to the back garden of our new home." The back garden at Castle Glamorgan was spacious enough for a cabin to be a minor addition. But Laura shook her head and declined. She would miss and reminisce, but she wouldn't insist on keeping everything. Let them fulfill their purpose. That's a good ending, never mind. Where do you think Jonah's restaurant would be built? The companions of Wintertown would all have their own houses in the future, and they had already more or less chosen their locations. While most of them chose locations around Winterhold, their choices varied widely. For example, Will Turner, besides being a blacksmith, was also a large landowner. Having lived in Port Royal, he wanted his new home closer to farmland and the Winter River. Leonard and his companions, on the other hand, wanted a quieter location with a laboratory, so they planned to build their new home to the north or northwest. Liadrin wanted to build a Church of Light. She had her eye on the area east of Wintertown, not far from the Winter Forest and overlooking the northern plains. Anyone entering Wintertown would easily notice her church. Everyone has different ideas and needs, and Laura could help with Jonah's plans. How about building a winter inn right next to Winterhold? It would provide food and lodging, and could even serve as a designated accommodation for guests from outside Wintertown. As long as Wintertown survived, Jonah wouldn't have to worry about his own business going out of business. That's a good idea. Building the inn east of Winterhold would make it visible to everyone visiting Wintertown. And since it was adjacent to the military barracks guarding Winterhold, it would provide ample security. Even the soldiers and those working there would become a steady source of customers. But then, I'll have to hire a new chef for this castle of Glamorgan. You'll probably need more than just a chef, you'll also need a housekeeper, Laura said, knowing the ropes. How about letting Eva help you with these daily chores? End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone, see you in the next video.